Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Corporate Citizenship Conference and Citizens Awards. I'm Mark DeCourcy, the Senior Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and I lead the Chamber's Corporate Citizenship Center. Last year at this time, we all reflected on the relentless dedication of the private sector to solve the most pressing issues and lead us through one of the most difficult years of our lifetime. We saw companies from every corner of the world step up to manufacture medical goods and pivot operations to serve the greater need. And as we near the end of 2021, despite the new and persistent challenges individuals and their families have, the mission of the private sector remains clear: address the immediate needs of our communities and accelerate momentum for a more equitable and sustainable future. Over the past year and a half, we continue to see the remarkable power of business to solve, and it underscored the fact that when we all come together, we can rebuild that much faster and that much stronger, more so than ever. So across the next 2 days, we'll explore the evolving role of the business in society, and we'll take a closer look at what we've achieved, but also what we need to go to ensure that we're meeting the moment, creating opportunities for everyone to thrive, both now and in the post-pandemic world. At the Chamber Foundation, we know how valuable it is to learn alongside CSR peers across different sectors and industries, and sharing those key lessons and practical strategies that you can take back to your organization. With that in mind, I'm pleased to share that we're partnering with Duke University's Sanford School of Public Policy. This December, we'll host an online executive education program on CSR. From December 6th through 14, participants will learn from top CSR and social impact leaders from companies like IBM, Ralph Lauren, JP Morgan Chase, BlackRock, Madewell, and how they've all successfully integrated CSR efforts across and embedded into their organizations. Participants in the program will also gain access to the latest data, best practices, and benchmarking assessments to make sure your organization is applying the most effective CSR principles to achieve the strongest results. And I hope you'll join us. The deadline to apply is December 1st. More information on this course can be seen in the chat box and also on our website. So we're excited to host today's event virtually and create a space where about 1,000 or 1,031, if you're counting, of all of us can gather safely and listen to the amazing speakers we have joining us this year. I encourage you to explore our event platform and check out the information on the speakers and also the sponsors. And throughout the program, we'll also be sharing the winners of our 22nd annual Citizens Awards. So make sure you tune into the announcements throughout the day to find out which companies will take home the trophies. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to our sponsors for this event, where we couldn't do it without them. So on to the program. It's my honor to begin today's programming to introduce Tom Wilson, President and CEO of the Allstate Corporation, and Stephanie Mehta, Editor-in-Chief of Fast Company. Tom assumed the role of CEO back in 2007 and spearheaded Allstate's Our Shared Purpose. That's a set of values including integrity, inclusive diversity, engagement, and accountability. All those things are embedded in everything the company does. Tom has also served as board chair of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and this last summer assumed the chairmanship of the board of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Stephanie is the first female editor-in-chief of Fast Company. She's broken gender barriers and serves as inspiration for all women to follow in her footsteps. We are delighted to have them both here with us today to discuss the value of being a purpose-driven company. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Mehta. I'm editor-in-chief at Fast Company, and I'm very excited today to be speaking with Tom Wilson, Chairman, President, and CEO of the Allstate Corporation, and Tom is also board chair of the U.S. Chamber Foundation. At Allstate, he has been CEO since 2007 and became chair of the Allstate Corporation's board of directors in 2008. He's held key leadership positions at the organization since 1995, including running all the major operating units. But most relevant to this conversation is that Tom led the creation of the Our Shared Purpose statement in 2007 to make Allstate a purpose-driven corporation. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Stephanie. Nice to meet you.
So let's start by talking about what Allstate's shared purpose is.
Well, our purpose at its highest level really is our North Star. it's like what we follow, and it has various parts to it. When you say what's our purpose at Allstate is to help empower our customers by protecting them so they can achieve their hopes and dreams. And we try to make it aspirational and broad enough so that it can morph over time and we can adapt with our customers in the world.
And how did the pandemic change your perspective around purpose, if it did at all?
I think at first it helped me conclude it's really important. Whenever you're in a tumultuous period of time, having a North Star is really helpful. And so we could come back to our employees, and our shared purpose has more in it than just what are we trying to achieve for our customers. It has our values in it. So inclusive, diversity, and equity is one of our values. Doing it ethically is a value. So we've used it really as a North Star. And I would say during the pandemic, it's been helpful to have a purpose-driven organization, because you can't be a purpose-driven organization if you're not powered by purpose-driven people. And so having those purpose-driven people, when everything breaks loose and you're not in your office and you're at home and you're trying to figure out how to Zoom and everything else, you need to know why you're doing it, because it gives you more energy. And that's been very helpful to us throughout the pandemic.
And for you as a leader, what are some of the big takeaways that you came away with the pandemic from about leading a purpose-driven organization?
Well, the first thing, and this is, you're trying not to look back and say how successful you've been, but I'm really glad we did it. And we started, in 2007, really. And we've had a long runway. And so it's embedded into kind of the fabric of our company. Almost every time we're talking about something, we're saying our shared purpose. So when you get to, whether it's a pandemic, we've had other times when there's been huge hurricanes or wildfires where we've had to have our people out. When our people are out trying to get around fire barriers or avoid water flooding, it's good for them to know what's a purpose, like why are we doing this? And it gives them more energy. So I feel like that's been quite helpful to us. I would say, as you look at, what has it changed about it? We looked at our purpose, our shared purpose during the pandemic. We said, what should be different? Because just because you say it once doesn't mean, like, I'm not in that camp of don't change it for 100 years. We've, I would say, refreshed it 3 times in 16 years. And this time we refreshed it around ways we think we needed to act differently in a virtual organization. So when we are done with the pandemic, whenever it's sort of under control, we'll be about 75% remote versus we were 20% remote before the pandemic. And so we said, well, how are we going to act differently? And we decided decision clarity and feedback were 2 things that are harder to do virtually. So we updated our shared purpose. We spent a bunch of time with our organization on it, and we're trying to embed new processes in place so that when we come to the new world, we're still as successful as we were coming into it.
Can you talk a little bit more about the process of evolving the shared purpose? You mentioned that there was a desire to supplement the shared purpose around the new way of working. Do those ideas bubble up from the bottom? Is that something that the leadership team decided that, it was time to take a look at things because of the changing way of work? How did that come about in practice?
Well, first I would say it's a team effort. And I don't just mean me and the senior leadership team, I mean our whole organization. And you want to be listening to your organization saying, does this purpose work for you? About how we got started on it was 2006. I just became CEO. And you take a new job and you become the managing editor and you say, okay, what am I going to get done? A couple of things. And I said, I want us to be more customer focused and to be a little more hard hitting, a little faster moving. And I decided it wasn't like we hadn't been working on that stuff. I said, we need more energy to do this. So we went down to a place in Florida that helps you think about your purpose to give you more energy. We came back all excited. We were so excited about it that we decided to have it be for all of our officers. We then decided, just not the 200 leadership group, we said, this is such a good thing, we should have our whole company be involved. So we've taken 38,000 people through this to help them achieve their purpose. And so it really started with an individual and saying, if you know what your own purpose is, it'll give you more energy. And we said, if that works for us, it should probably work for the whole company. It should work for an organization. So that was why we created our shared purpose. It was trying to instill that energy and create more energy and focus by being clear about what our purpose was.
Tom, I'd love you to talk a little bit more about how Allstate helps employees find their own personal purpose. It seems to be a topic that has moved to the fore throughout corporate America, particularly as we've seen so many employees say that as a result of the economic and health crises that we've been living through, they want their jobs to have meaning too. What are some of the ways that you have helped the people on your team find personal purpose at work?
Well, Stephanie, I agree that a bunch of people do want more about purpose. You hear it all the time in recruiting people. But I think it's been something that's been building for a while. And I think we could talk more about it, but I think, society is wanting in a whole bunch of ways, and people are looking for somebody to help fix it. And they think, they can do it. And so they want to be inspired to do that. So we started just because we said, if this is good for us and we have more energy, we have 43,000 employees, how great would it be if they had more energy too? So we really started as a way to kind of help them get engaged. We don't link it to our company purpose. We don't make them go through a process and say, come back and tell us why your purpose is aligned. And the logic is you give to get. So if we give you the opportunity to figure out what your personal purpose is, you'll find a way to embed what our purpose is as a company in your personal purpose, or you might not. But if you don't, then what you do is you realize, well, I'm not really aligned with what Allstate's doing. And rather than be a disengaged, grumpy employee who's, not doing anything, you go someplace else because you're trying to achieve your own personal purpose. Or maybe you're not disgruntled, maybe you're just not giving it 110%. And so what it does is we have found that give to get, not only does it help people value what Allstate's doing, helps them have a better life, but it also builds a stronger organization. So of all the things I've done as CEO of Allstate, the thing I'm most proud of is 38,000 people have had an opportunity to pursue their own purpose.
We've talked about personal purpose and corporate purpose. I know that another focus of the conference is resilience and preparedness for anything that may happen in the future. That's something you probably talk a lot about at Allstate. Is there something about resilience, corporate resilience specifically, that you've learned about over the course of your career that you can share with the audience?
Well, I've been through some ups and downs. So yes, you do. I think I would start with say that corporate resilience is like your own personal resilience. If you know what you want to do, then it gives you that energy to stick with it. If it's important to you, if it's not important to you, you're not going to be resilient. You're okay, whatever, I don't care that much. So the corporation has to be important to individuals, and the corporation has to be important to society. So I would start there. But then I would say in terms of getting through it, there's a couple of things. I just keep moving. Get some information. You're not going to get all the facts. Don't wait for all the facts. Try to look at, what happens if I make it wrong, and just make a decision and keep moving. I'd say secondly, be positive. Doubt is the enemy of moving forward. And so you just got to believe. There's some times when I look back and I think, I don't know why I believe that, but by believing it, it gives you the energy to really get through it. So I think perspective is also useful. It's just another decision. You can't get locked down and be frozen, because that never helps. Not moving is not a good. So I would keep moving. Take risks, move forward, be positive, and then involve other people. And where if you involve other people in your quest, it'll be much easier to get through it. And people want to help. Sometimes, we don't want to reach out and bother somebody with a problem. We think they're busy. I'm no, when you read, people like to help other people. So let them help you, and you'll get through whatever your problem is.
Tom, I know you get a variation of the question, what keeps you up at night all the time, but I'd like to hear a little bit about your concerns around the corporate purpose and whether there are any threats or risk to corporate purpose that you worry about or that you feel you need to guard against.
Well, I don't know about guarding it. I mean, there are currently some, there are clearly headwinds towards corporate purpose. And that's, I think, people trying to decide what's the role of business. So if you think the role of business is to take care of your customers, most people agree with that. Like, why else are you in business? If you think the role of business is to show a profit, I agree with that too. And I think that's clearly there, because I think a profit is just a measure of whether you're adding any value. If the accountants do it and it's fancy and we've got all kinds of rules around it and stuff, but basically it's like, I created something, I gave it to you, Stephanie, you said, yeah, I think it's worth about $10. And if my parts to do that were cost $8, I make a $2 profit. And that shows I added value. So I think taking care of customers, making profit, a core to that. I think also, though, improving society and creating opportunity for your team members are two other really important parts of organizations and businesses. And I think that's why we exist. We exist. If you ask most of your employees why it exists, they won't tell you it's to make a profit. But many of them will say it's to help customers. Some of it's like, because you're helping me with my life. So if that's what your stakeholders are telling you, I expect you to help do that. Then you got to create opportunity for your team. And then I think improving society. And I think that's where you're hearing what people are saying today is, look, we got problems in society. Like, we need somebody to fix it. So they're looking to whoever they can, and they know business can help. So I think the headwinds are if people get too focused on the second one, which is just making money, because I think you can make money and do these other things. I don't think it's really that hard.
Yeah. And, do you face those headwinds at Allstate from shareholders? Do you face it from, bondholders? I'm just curious about whether or not your statement of shared purpose, which is right there on your website, and you've been very clear in articulating what you see as the role of Allstate in the world. Does that run up against conflict in certain circles?
I think the tide has turned on it. And so I spend a fair amount of time out talking to our shareholders, both the portfolio managers who are buying and selling, right, as well as the governance people. And I think the leadership of people like Larry Fink and BlackRock and others has really changed it. Like, people are ESG, environmental, social, governance, all over everything. People want it embedded into your strategy. They want to know what your purpose is. They want to know why you're doing it. And now they want more disclosure. It's going to move past what are you doing to disclosure, to what are your goals, to how I'm going to measure you. Now, we don't have the measurement on that like yet we do on profit. Like, so that, I don't know how many accountants there are in the world, but there's a lot of them. But I think we're headed down that path, which I think is a really good thing, because what that'll do is business will serve its purpose in society. And I think it's our time, really, as business. Like, I think some people might not want to be thrust into it. But if you think about other events where society has demanded people to do a different role, or be an example, World War II, many women are not in the workforce. We create Rosie the Riveter, and look where we are today. We are so much better because we have so many highly talented, creative female leaders who are driving our world. Like, had we not forced that to happen because there was some outside stimulus, who knows how long it would have taken, right? I think the same thing is true with business today. Government's not really working as well as any of us would like, including the people in government. Our nonprofits don't have enough resources, and quite honestly, they don't have the business processes. Like, the business processes that exist at your publication are light years ahead of any other nonprofit, not because you're so much smarter, your people are so much better. It's just they've invested all their money in fixing problems. You've invested your money in creating systems and processes. So I think society's looking at business and say, hey, we need you. I think when we get all done, the role of business will be widely viewed as much broader than it is today.
Shifting gears back to the employees for a moment, in addition to employees wanting more purpose out of work, we're also seeing lots of research suggesting that employees are more burned out than they've ever been. I think there's a recent McKinsey study that showed that something like 38% of women and 28% of men say that they feel like they have reached the point of burnout, and that's up 10 points from a year ago. What are some of the ways businesses can better address employee health and well-being?
I wish I had really good answers to that. I think you're right. And I see it with our employees, whether it's you're, clicking on Zoom call to Zoom call, and you're like, oh my gosh, by the end of the day, you feel like you've just been, things have been coming by you at a rapid pace, to losing that sort of sense of affiliation of just walking out of a meeting and how are you? How was your weekend? Or did you see that play? Can you believe this happened? So I think businesses, we do have this problem. I think focusing on affiliation and how do you create affiliation in a virtual world, some people are really good at with Slack and Teams and stuff like that. But I think if you said, do businesses have the kind of processes around affiliation that we do and everything else? No, I would say the second thing is, and I think this is where we have to go on the journey, Stephanie, is we need to measure it differently. Like, we should be thinking about employee wellness differently. Like, how many people have a living wage? How stressed out are they? And if we measure it as a business, we will focus on it. We may not get the right answer right away. We may go down a bunch of blind alleys, but I think if we don't start to think about our employee base and resource differently in terms of giving it complete wellness, financial wellness, emotional wellness, and really measure it, as opposed to most of us just do, are you happy at work? And that's not bad. It's just not enough.
What are some of the things that you do, Tom, to get centered or make sure that you are experiencing some work-life balance?
Well, some might argue I don't really have much balance, so I think I'm okay. But what do you do about it? I think everybody does it differently, right? Like some people are sports, some people read. What I try to do is I really do try to develop the ability to ignore. Like, how do you just turn it off, right? Like, so how do you not look at the phone? So there are times when I just decide I am not looking at email for a certain time. Once a year, we used to, before pre-pandemic, we would go on like a 2 or 3 week expedition, my wife and I literally would like not do email for 2 weeks. And when you do, you just ignore it. Like suddenly your brain and your emotions and stuff can fill it in and you can get some perspective. Mm-hmm. So I really try to ignore it so that I can create perspective for myself. If I create perspective for myself, then some of those things that I'm burned out about, you just care less about. You're like, yeah, okay, the person was not very nice to me. Okay, maybe they're having a bad day, as opposed to making it about you.
Well, that does sound extremely healthy. Tom, before I let you go, I'd love to hear about what makes you optimistic about the future, whether it's the role of business or, in general, things that that make you feel like it's going to be a bright future ahead.
I think it's people. I think it's just when you think about people, that's the source of all success, right? Like people create patents, they build plants, they come up with new plays. It's people that are the source of all success. And I am so excited that people seem more engaged in making the world better. It's a little tumultuous, right? Like it's hard. So the idea of broadening inclusion, more diversity, more equity, it's like, who knows how many great plays we haven't seen, or because we've got, underinvested neighborhoods and kids who have crappy educations and no one's paying attention. So I'm excited that what we're doing is we're starting to say, look, this people is the source of all success. And to the extent we can turn it loose, and people want to do it, like people are engaged, they want to add value. Like I don't know anybody who says they don't want to add value. Some maybe not in ways that we would appreciate, but there are so many people that I think if we turn them loose, that's what makes me optimistic. And I think the institutions we have, whether it's business or government, will adapt if we as people drive them to change. But it really has to start with each of us individually.
Tom, we set out to talk about corporate purpose and ended with people. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Since 1951, the UPS Foundation has been delivering help where it's needed most, anywhere in the world. We're delivering health and humanitarian relief, equity and economic empowerment, local community engagement, and planet protection.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Matz, and I lead communications for the U.S. Chamber Foundation's Corporate Citizenship Center. I'm pleased to open our next segment and the first of our Citizens Awards presentations for this year's program. For those of you who are hearing about the Citizens Awards for the first time, the Chamber Foundation created the program 22 years ago to honor the best in corporate citizenship. In 2019, we started the Corporate Citizenship Hall of Fame as a way of documenting the living history of corporate philanthropy and social responsibility. In our 20+ years of hosting the Citizens Awards, we've had the privilege of honoring hundreds of companies for their extraordinary contributions to the betterment of society. It's brought us great pride to share their remarkable stories, and through our Hall of Fame, place a spotlight on a few of the most exceptional past Citizens Awards winners. Through the power of storytelling, we've been able to inspire others to make a positive impact.
That's right, Sarah. The Corporate Citizenship Hall of Fame commemorates companies for their leaders, employees, and cross-sector partners for their decades-long commitment to solving the world's biggest issues. With each year that passes, we see the private sector step up in unimaginable ways to address both the new and persistent challenges. And no time has this been more evident than through the COVID-19 pandemic. The last year and a half has demonstrated the enormous impact the business leadership has not only for our economic growth, but also for the strength of our communities, both here and abroad. This year, we're honored to induct the newest member into our Hall of Fame, Abbott. For more than 130 years, Abbott's mission to help people live fuller lives through better health has driven everything they do. So much so that they have committed to improving the lives of more than 3 billion people by decade's end. From advancing health equity and designing their products for broader access and affordability, to driving social innovations that lead to more resilient and healthier communities, Abbott is delivering long-term impact in shaping the future of healthcare. Now, Abbott joins a group of leading businesses who are already in the Hall of Fame, including the Citi Foundation, Cisco, DSM North America, Entergy, FedEx, GSK, Merck, and UPS. I can confidently say that these 9 companies are acting as a catalyst for change in every aspect of society and setting an example for the rest of the private sector. I invited Abbott's Chief Marketing and Communications Officer, Melissa Bratz, to join us today so she can tell you a little bit more about their corporate citizenship journey and how they get to where they are today. Melissa, you have so much to be proud of in terms of the way your company has mobilized its resources and expertise to develop solutions to the challenges that our communities face, not just during the pandemic, but for many years prior. Looking back, if you could pick the one thing you're most proud of, what would it be?
At Abbott, we've been working for more than 130 years to help people have better health, and our proudest moment in recent times is our response to COVID-19. Our people from all over the world stepped up to the challenge to quickly adapt and deliver solutions. The result was a dozen different tests to detect COVID, from laboratory-based tests to rapid point-of-care tests used in doctors' offices, clinics, schools, workplaces, and even your home. As important as creating the tests was the ability to produce them at mass scale. We increased our manufacturing capacity, quickly launching 3 new facilities, allowing us to deliver tens of millions of tests every month. To date, we've shipped more than 1 billion tests all over the world. But we didn't stop there. We innovated across our other businesses and partnered with others, supporting frontline workers and communities hit hard by the virus. This included $29 million in cash and product donations across 63 countries. The pandemic demonstrated the power of medical innovation and partnership to help improve the lives of more people in more places. There's enormous pride across Abbott that we were able to contribute in a meaningful and relevant way.
Thanks, Melissa. I'd like to now get your perspective on the future of corporate social responsibility. As we touched on a few minutes ago in our previous session, we've all seen how COVID-19 has transformed every aspect of our lives, including the role of business in society. Looking ahead, what does the future of corporate citizenship look like?
All businesses have important roles to play in addressing the many challenges facing our world, and we each need to do our part in impacting the areas where we have the most influence and unique capabilities. At Abbott, we believe that a sustainable future starts with health. It's the foundation for what we can all achieve in life. It helps societies thrive and fuels successful economies. But looking ahead, the world faces immense health threats, from the devastating impacts of COVID to the major barriers we face in confronting other infectious diseases, chronic conditions like diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and malnutrition. Health systems, workers, and budgets all over the world are overburdened. There are widening gaps in healthcare access and tremendous healthcare inequities all over the world. Something needs to change. Business as usual is not enough. That's why the central strategy of Abbott's 2030 sustainability plan is to design access and affordability into our products at every stage of development to make sure more people can benefit from them. We're also working in partnership with others to break down barriers that prevent people from getting the care they need. Our goal is to impact the lives of 3 billion people every year by 2030. That's 1 billion more than we do today and 1 in 3 people on the planet.
Melissa, thank you for sharing these insights and for all that you and your colleagues at Abbott do. I encourage everyone to learn more about the Hall of Fame and the impact the inductees are making all over the world. Their stories can be found right here in the Business Solves event platform. Once again, congratulations to Abbott.
Welcome. My name is Kwesi Mitchell. I'm the Chief Purpose Officer for Deloitte, and I'm excited to be here today. In particular, I'm excited to host a fireside chat with 2 close friends on purpose-driven organizations and the collective impact that we all can have through coalitions. And first and foremost, let's start with why purpose. As so many of you are dealing with, talent is such a critical issue as we are now within the Great Resignation. It's so clear and completely obvious, supported by numerous studies, that being a purpose-driven organization improves retention and also creates a sense of belonging for your people, such that they are so much more prone to stay with you and drive an impact at scale in the future. The other thing that's really, really critical with respect to purpose is that purpose-driven organizations have been shown to be engines of higher growth and attract higher levels of customer engagement and investor retention. So on all fronts, being focused on purpose is something that's key for all of us going forward. And I do not see that specific trend changing in the future. Now, secondly, why business coalitions? And coalitions are just critical because the impact that we can collectively have as an extension of what historically had been done by government or nonprofits or community organizations is just growing by the day. Societal challenges are so complex and are steeped in such long traditions of not only habit, but in many respects, neglect as well, that business just has this really critical role that we can drive forward with change at a scale that could not be achieved without us. The other thing that I think is very important here is that we as a business community bring unique insights on what truly can happen with respect to being focused on inclusive growth and inclusive capitalism more broadly. So with that, I'm going to ask for two good friends to join me. And first, I'm going to start with JB. JB, I'd like for you to introduce yourself, and then I'd like for you to speak a little bit to what the Greater Washington Partnership is, and what does inclusive growth mean to you?
Great. Thanks very much, Kwesi. It's great to see you, and thanks for having us as part of this conversation today. We're excited about it, and I'll try to keep my comments relatively brief, but the partnership really is a representation of the kind of coalition that you referred to, Kwesi. It came together a few years ago, and it now represents about 40 of the largest employers and it's regional. It's the region from Baltimore to Richmond. So by definition, we cut across jurisdictions, which in itself is a pretty unique kind of construct. We're also representative of lots of kinds of industries. Deloitte has been a key partner in our work, and we have other service organizations as well, but we have Northrop Grumman and General Dynamics. We have JP Morgan Chase and Capital One. We also have higher ed institutions, Georgetown, Johns Hopkins, Howard. The presidents of those organizations are on our board as well. And we have not-for-profit organizations, Inova and MedStar, the two biggest healthcare. So we're a very unique coalition that cuts across both regions and industries. With respect to inclusive growth, I've been here for a little bit over a year, and in that time, we've understood that the framework for our work should be inclusive growth. And the reason for that is it isn't just because this is a moral imperative, which I think organizations have come increasingly to understand over the course of the last year and a half. It's also a huge economic opportunity for the region. We've done some analytical work that shows that if we can make progress to closing some of the historic equity gaps, some of the wealth gaps that exist, there's a $50 billion per year GDP opportunity for the region alone. This is a very diverse region. As it becomes more equitable, it will win that competition for talent, Kwesi, that you mentioned. And therefore, there's nothing better that a group like this could focus on than driving growth through a more inclusive economy. To that end, we've been bringing more and more organizations to the table to help us work on that. And again, your organization has been very helpful in that, because there are lots of people doing great work in the areas that we've identified as the important gap areas to work on collectively. All of them collectively need to be contributing to this goal. And that's part of what a coalition like this can help make sure happens.
And JP, a quick follow-up question for you. Why is now the moment for us to focus on this? Like, as you said, you've been with the Greater Washington Partnership for a year. A person such as yourself could have done so many distinct things. Why now?
I think you touched on one of the main drivers for that, Kwesi, which is their businesses are, if not the most, among the most trusted institutions right now. And boy, if we've got a deficit in anything compared to our past, it's trust. So businesses alone feel an obligation and opportunity. Businesses collectively can have extraordinary influence at a time when it's difficult to move toward collective action. So it's again back to what we spoke a little bit about before. It's an imperative. It is a moral imperative. I think everyone has come to understand that equity, inclusion, and diversity are no longer options. They are foundational to building the kind of organization with purpose, as you pointed out, that matters going forward. But it's also just a tremendous differential economic opportunity. We have all of these wonderful assets in this region. If we can collectively act to bring those to bear toward a more inclusive economy, we'll win economically.
I could not agree more. Now I'd like for another friend of mine to join, Tamika. I'd love for you to introduce yourself and And I want to point out to everyone who's joined us, like Tamika is a true role model in the areas of inclusive leadership and growth. And Tamika, I'd like for you to speak a little bit about some of the things that you're doing and that you've driven through Deloitte.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kwesi, and thank you for having me. It is a pleasure, of course, to be on any panel with you and to be on a panel with JB. So I'm just thrilled. Thank you very, very much. So first, I'm the managing principal here for Deloitte in Greater Washington, and it is every day I'm reminded of how much of a privilege this is to really be a leader in this organization. Your question around inclusive leadership, that is near and dear to my heart, right? It is something that we live and breathe every day here at Deloitte. And what it means for me specifically is that each of us brings a unique set of experiences and viewpoints shaped by a myriad of factors, whether they're professional, whether they're cultural, or even gender-based. But the reality is it encompasses many things, right? And so being inclusive is really the key to effectively leading, particularly with respect to our clients, because as we try to build trusted advisor relationships, it's really critical that we have relationships that are built upon inclusivity, but it's also critical as we are also working with each other day in and day out. And as you mentioned, while we talk about it being a time of great resignation, it's also a time of great intention and purpose, right? Where people are really focused on what they are doing and what it means to them. And organizations have become a part of that. So I think you said it best when you said that purpose is integrated with core business operations. It generates significant value for the business, the client, and the stakeholders. But here at Deloitte, specifically here in Greater Washington, we've looked at inclusivity from a very simple lens. We looked at it as finding a way to be kind to one another. As you know, I've talked so much about the business of kindness and why it's important. And even the U.S. Chamber of Commerce several years ago brought this forth in the business community so we could engage in these conversations. But the reality is that it was about being more inclusive and making sure that people were seeing that, whether or not it was specifically here in our hallways in Deloitte, or whether or not it was with our clients, or whether or not we saw other organizations exhibiting that as well. So it became critical to how we do business. And in that way, many of our professionals really felt like they could be a part of something. They didn't have that fear of being wrong. They didn't have that fear of not being good enough or having to cover for certain things. And so it really made it a significant effort for us here. And we've seen a significant change as a result of it. And our North Star here at Deloitte continues to be to create a place where everyone can connect, belong, and grow. That's what we're about. We want everyone to feel empowered to advance and succeed at Deloitte, both internally, but with our clients as well as we continue to build relationships.
And Tamika, there's so many different things that you could spend your time on as well. Why is this important to you? And why have you given so much of your time to the Greater Washington Partnership?
Yeah, so it is critical to me because I really do think, particularly in our region, not that it's not important anywhere else in the country, but we are in a place where there are always, discussions around, political climate that we deal with, economic discourse that we deal with, healthcare that we're dealing with. And I think it is so critically important that we are remembering that everyone is approaching things from a different lens. And I love that the Greater Washington Partnership appreciates that and is really part of retooling and reskilling our people is part of how we can make sure that we're being more inclusive and that we're hearing many different voices, and that becomes critical to our success.
Perfect. Now, I'd like for you both to weigh in on this next question, and I'll start with JB. Let's talk a little bit about driving systemic change. What are some things that we should focus on, JB?
Thanks for that question. I think there are probably three things in particular. One is, and some sound easy, but they're not necessarily. One thing that everyone can do quickly is just be willing to share best practices fast. Everyone is on this journey. There are different phases, there are different stages. They've learned different things. The faster we can share the best things that we've learned across, the faster other organizations will adopt those. And so that's a good thing. That's not a difficult thing, but that's something that we should absolutely be doing. I think that collectively agreeing to make impact is an important thing as well. So if we can we're working, for example, on collective supplier diversity commitments across the region, across the employers in the region. I think lifting up not only what commitments people already have and adding all those up and pointing those out as priorities is something that is good. But I think the third thing, and this is really the test, is collective action. Can we collectively say, great, here are our best practices, great, we're all doing these things collectively, and that's really super, and we're doing more than we used to do, and now we're going to do more. All that is really good, and now we're going to do more, and then hold ourselves accountable to all of that. Make sure that we've got a method to track those sorts of things, that we really are saying, look, over the long haul, have we really followed through and gotten those done? I think all that is eminently possible. I think organizations like ours are helpful intermediaries in terms of being sort of a safe, not so much place, but a safe convener to ensure that those kinds of things happen. And again, it doesn't happen though without the support of organizations like yours, because that's how we are able to get leverage in terms of pulling together the pieces and parts that all the organizations need in order to follow through with those three aspects.
No, and JB, I just wanted to comment. I think that you've done such a great job with that, because every time I see that you're collecting, being that convener, showing like, hey, here's the commitments that are out there. Here's your other organizations who are along for that ride. And what the Greater Washington Partnership has done a phenomenal job is every time I see material, I feel proud to be with the group of organizations that you've been able to assemble. And I do think it's a group of organizations that can drive systemic change collectively.
I appreciate that. And I think that's a position that we want everyone to fundamentally believe, that collectively we can move in a faster pace than we might otherwise.
Exactly. Tamika would love your perspective on this question.
No, absolutely. And Kwesi, it's in addition to what certainly you and JB have mentioned, I believe that there are programmatic things that we can do to drive systemic change. We can certainly pay attention to the workforce and the future of work and understanding how technology will play a significant role in that. And even from an innovation standpoint, think about how people can do things differently and the level of access that human beings will have. We're going to have to find a way to start really humanizing a lot of the work, right? So empathy, being able to connect with people will become incredibly significant. But more than anything, I think the best way that we can continue to drive systemic change is to be bolder about the things that we do. As I started today, I shared with you that it's a privilege to be a leader here, right? So each and every one of us has an opportunity to do something different, perhaps something that's bold, right? And we don't have to over-engineer it or think more about it. So, by way of example, I will tell you one of the programs that we have here that I am most proudest of is our Next Generation of Leaders program, and we have them amongst all the C-suite. And it was not lost on me. While we didn't choose the professionals that would actually attend it, it typically came from our clients. We do have the ability to make sure that that looks more diverse so that we are controlling what happens in the future. And so people have said to me, how come we don't have more people of color, or why don't we have more women? And so, just recently I had to say, we are going to make sure that this next class of leaders is going to be diverse. And when I was told that, Tamika, we just can't get there, I said, no, we are going to get there. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to get there, right? We have to be bolder. We can figure these things out. It's not rocket science, right? And so sometimes it's something as simple as being, standing close to your convictions of what you believe is the right thing that makes things happen. And the reality is we went from 4 to 18 people as a part of this academy, but it really just meant that someone had to actually stand up and say, this is important, and this is what we want to see that's different. Where, it may be appropriate to have a softer touch when we're doing other things, but it's always critically important that we are doing things, that we're showing up, that we're sponsoring others, that we're putting people in positions where they're able to shine. As you know, Kwesi, I talk a lot about exposure. And for many individuals, part of what makes it a deficit for them is just not having experienced it before. So giving people the opportunities like we do at Deloitte, I think will continue to make a huge difference.
And I just want to highlight that because there's two things that I've learned from Tamika that I want everyone in the audience to understand. One, small act of kindness on a daily basis. And the second thing is be bold, right? And I feel like given all the things that we're trying to do, there's no substitute for boldness. So that being said, I had one other item that I was going to start this particular piece and then ask for you two just to share some additional perspectives, because there's so many organizations who have joined, who are thinking about the purpose journey that they're on, how they can contribute to different aspects of inclusive growth and things of that nature. And so in my role within our firm, what I've seen again and again, when talking about purpose, is that if you are on your purpose journey, there's really three specific things that are front and center that I think that everybody should keep in mind. It's got to be integrated into your strategy. You can't have a purpose strategy over here and a business strategy over there and just hope that things are going to play out overall. They're one and the same. And as I started with, purpose is just so integral for winning the war for talent, to really driving growth in unique and distinctive ways, and driving connections that just don't exist otherwise. Secondly, focus your energy. You can't do everything, right? You just fundamentally cannot do everything. So we need to simplify and engage. And I think that those are just the key parts of focus, so that we can really make sure that we're driving an impact with respect to purpose on areas that matter. And then lastly, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about being on this panel with JB, is taking friends along, right? The challenges that we're just trying to solve are just so fundamentally large that having that motley crew of friends that you bring along on the ride just to drive change in ways that historically weren't possible is just absolutely vital. JB, anything that you wanted to add to that?
I wanted to thank Tamika for the kindness box I received a few months ago. I meant to tell you thank you for that, because it was a perfect example of what you were just talking about in terms of every day can make a difference. And I then did share some components of that with others as a way to extend kindness forward. I love that. I think purpose feels difficult now and is opportunity immediately. That's how I tend to think about it. And I think if everyone accepts that, we used to think that way about strategy. It was like, well, that's really hard, but I got to think about it. Well, purpose is that too. It's all to the good. It can feel uncomfortable, and that means that we're making progress, and that in turn is opportunity. And then the last point, I love the point about empathy. We need empathetic algorithms. I think if we can solve for that, well, we got all these algorithms out there. Someone forgot the empathy gene in terms of developing all that. But some thoughts from me. Thanks, Kwesi.
Perfect. Tamika, anything from you?
Yes, and I love that thought, JB, about sort of having some empathy. I think my only fear is, though, it might make them more human, right? Because that's what we got all our ability to be empathetic. So you are right. The corporate sector definitely has a crucial role to play. And for starters, even as we're dealing with recruiting and retention, people often ask, what are we doing in the community? What are we doing to raise each other up or to do something different? So it impacts the way we hire. It impacts the way we develop people. It impacts what people do each and every day and what they think of when they think of Deloitte. So we have the opportunity, and no place other than corporate entities really have the ability to make the impact in such a huge way. So the more that companies can get together in an organized way, the more we achieve the scale that we really need to actually get closer to equity and prosperity. Perfect.
I have a final wild card question for both of you. What's your aspiration for where we're going to be in 10 years? As we talk, we've had this conversation today. Like, what's the conversation that you hope that we'll all collectively be having 10 years from now on this particular topic? JB, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think we should aspire to close the wealth equity gap in that time frame. That's a ridiculously huge objective, but let's go for it. Why not? And that means creating the right kind of opportunity and doing all the other sorts of things that are necessary to get that done. Let's do it.
I love it. Tamika, what about yourself?
So, I have lots of wishes for the next 10 years. One is that we won't have to have this conversation, right? Because it will just be a given. The other thing that I wish is that, while I appreciate that we can't have complete equity, I do hope that we will be as close to it as humanly possible, and that individuals will have the exposure that they need, and everyone will be treated with dignity and respect.
Love it. And my wish would be that the Greater Washington Partnership continues to grow, right? There's so many phenomenal organizations that are part of the partnership thus far. The more that we get additional leaders and organizations to lean in, the broader the impact that we can have throughout this region. So 10 years from now, I would love to be back on a panel with you two, talking about how the Greater Washington Partnership has grown 4 or 5-fold and we're truly driving some impactful change more broadly. So with that, I want to thank you both for your time. I want to thank the audience for joining us today, and looking forward to a phenomenal feedback and continued conversation with respect to the partnership and all of the other things that we've talked about today from the standpoint of inclusive growth. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'll see you in 10 years.
Good to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is John Brothers, and I am the president of the T. Rowe Price Foundation and T. Rowe Price Charitable. We were last year's winner of the Best Community Improvement Program. It was such an amazing honor, and we are so excited that it is going to an amazing organization and company this year. This award has meant so much to both our work here, not only in Baltimore, but in our communities across the globe. And we know it's just so important for corporations to have really great relationships and work in community. And we were so proud that our work had been honored in this way, and we know that you will be too. So thank you so much for all that you do. And we're glad that we're able to join you in celebrating this amazing award this year.
The finalists for the 2021 Best Community Improvement Program Award are DTE Energy. DTE Energy's commitment to providing meaningful employment experience for youth in Michigan continued through the COVID-19 pandemic. In March 2020, DTE began plans to convert a hands-on internship to a completely virtual summer internship experience. The Summer Youth Internship Program exposes youth to DTE careers and provides mentoring, training, and wraparound services to help ensure the success of each intern. Liberty Mutual Insurance. Liberty Mutual invests its financial strength and employee expertise in helping homelessness become rare, brief, and non-recurring for youth and young adults. To address these challenges, Liberty Mutual partners with key stakeholders, commissions original research, works with community leaders, and listens to youth with lived experiences. Alongside these efforts, the company's financial and volunteer support has helped 674 young people exit to stable housing and 152 young people find transitional housing between 2018 and 2020. Since 2018, Liberty Mutual has committed $13.9 million to youth and young adult homelessness efforts in Boston. VF Corporation. VF's goal is to improve the lives of 2 million workers by 2030. To do this, VF is going beyond its factory walls to provide access to healthcare, clean water, education, and childcare for workers in its global supply chain through its Worker and Community Development Program. As part of the program, VF developed an Access to Water and Sanitation initiative in Bangladesh and Cambodia to address the challenges facing workers who had limited access to clean water. They also partnered with WaterAid and Water and Sanitation for the Urban Poor to develop programs which involved training workers and community in hygiene awareness, improving access to toilets and soap, and developing a system for operating and maintaining the water and sanitation facilities.
Thanks, John. What an amazing group of companies doing such impactful work in their communities. I'm Lawrence Bowdish, the Executive Director for Research and Issue Networks for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. I'm very proud to announce the winner of the Best Community Improvement Program. I have it right here. There is a piece of paper, and it says, congratulations to Liberty Mutual Insurance. Let's hear more from them.
Thanks to the U.S. Chamber for this incredible honor of Best Community Improvement Program. Congratulations to all finalists who've done stellar work to better the country. Our community partners who work directly with those we seek to support are key to our mission of advancing security and ending youth homelessness. Through them, we've learned where the needs are and how we can best use Liberty Mutual's resources to help change the lives of youth experiencing homelessness. Through our partners, we hear youth voices, and we've come to authentically understand both their experiences and their potential. That's how our program came together, and that's how we'll continue to strengthen it going forward.
There are so many others who've helped us, educated us, partnered with us in these efforts. We've worked with staff from the City of Boston, State of Massachusetts, and our federal government, all bringing unique perspectives and new strategies on how to change the dynamics and make progress on solving youth homelessness. Our philanthropy team at Liberty all had a hand in this. And from our CEO, David Long, to employees throughout the US and abroad, we believe that security today helps people build their futures. And that is a very important part of our values.
This work is about the 4.2 million homeless youth who are bouncing from one friend's house to another, staying in our shelter systems or living on the streets every year in this country. Unaccompanied, alone, abandoned, they are strong and resilient, but those nights of homelessness chip away at their self-esteem, their hopes, their dreams, and sometimes their very futures. In fact, 50% of adults who are chronically homeless today were homeless as youth. So we thank you for this award. We are very honored. And we dedicate it to the brave young people who are surviving on the streets tonight, who have lost nearly everything, but who, with the attention of more and more of us, will hopefully find compassion and opportunity and encouragement before the morning comes. On behalf of all of us at Liberty Mutual Insurance, I thank you.
Hi, I'm Nick Sukic, a managing director and partner at Boston Consulting Group, where I work primarily at the intersection of our healthcare and social impact practices. Over the last 18 months, BCG has been involved in COVID response efforts around the world. We've worked with more than 50 countries, more than 10 US states, and many global health multinational organizations in COVID response and recovery. We've also published thought pieces on the state of the pandemic and on economic impact. I'm here today with a group of esteemed panelists to talk more about coordinated response of private sector players to the COVID crisis. I'm delighted to introduce three esteemed panelists. First, Jill Huntley, who's the Global Managing Director for Corporate Citizenship at Accenture. Also, Mike Carney, Senior Vice President of Emerging Issues at the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation. And also Nisha Biswal, also a Senior Vice President of International Strategy and Global Initiatives at the US Chamber of Commerce. I want to let them do most of the talking today, so let's jump right into the discussion. So the Global Task Force on Pandemic Response sought to drive collective action and impact, but the context of each of the companies that participated in the task force was quite different. Jill, I'd love to start with you by hearing a bit more about Accenture's response to COVID around the world and what you were able to accomplish as members of the task force.
Thanks, Nick. It's great to be here today, and it's such a privilege to be able to reflect on these last few months because they have really been extraordinary. And I think for us at Accenture, the Global Task Force was such an important pillar of our overall COVID response at Accenture. Aside from the scale of impact that the task force allowed us to have in India and later Southeast Asia, it also provided a model and a benchmark of collaboration, which has helped us to make additional impact in many other places around the world. So the task force was the main part of our philanthropic contributions in India, although we also made donations of an additional $10 million to local initiatives in our communities there. And we structured that response in India in 3 areas. We were augmenting the healthcare and hospital capacity, so that was sort of oxygen and equipment. We were reducing strain on the health system by providing home care to our employees and others in the community. And we were looking to protect lives through vaccinations and related information. And beyond India, we responded to COVID crises in a number of other places where we have employees. And obviously there was great need in many communities. And just to give you a couple of data points that might help you to frame the sense of where Accenture operates, we have 624,000 employees in over 50 countries around the world. And in India alone, we have 250,000 employees. So that was the sort of scale at which we were looking to engage with our own people and with the communities in which we operate. And so our COVID response needed to address, multiple countries at the same time, all with slightly different needs. And before the crisis in India, our response had followed a fairly sort of familiar set of lines around, through lockdown and recovery. And we were supporting a number of programs that were balancing immediate response with stages of recovery, and then in some cases starting to rebuild. And with the size of the crisis in India, we really had to think differently. There was a different scale and pace of response that was needed, and our approach evolved quite dramatically. And I think helping to sort of mobilize and support the global task force was a really important part of that. We can talk more about how that came about, but ultimately it did anchor our overall response in India and provided a sort of new momentum to that. And then, as I said, it became a bit of a template for collaborating elsewhere. And in the end, we mobilized community responses in India and the Philippines, South Africa, Brazil, a number of other Latin American countries, and then into Southeast Asia, where again, we were able to work with and through the task force to ramp up our own actions alongside those of the task force. So I think, to summarize all of that, the task force was certainly a significant center of gravity for Accenture's response overall, and particularly in India and Indonesia. And it just really offered a way of thinking about and pursuing our response in other places as well.
Thanks. It's really helpful to hear. I think Accenture, like many other companies, was very active in participation around the world in various COVID efforts, and helpful to hear a bit how the task force created that center of gravity and that sort of coordinating function. Mike, I'd love to turn to you, if you don't mind, sharing some of the experiences you've had from engaging with other private sector actors that were part of the task force as well.
Thanks, Nick. And, first I want to say thanks to Jill and to her colleagues at Accenture. One of the big learnings that we have had over the course of the pandemic is just the importance of a strong public-private response to this. And what the engagement of companies has shown us is, I'd say there are really 3 key learnings. One is that catalytic leadership by global CEOs can really spur action. It can also force other institutions to move faster, which can be really, really important in a life and death situation as posed by COVID. The second thing I would say is, one of the things that differentiates the global task force, and there are many aspects of it that are different from anything at least we've ever done, is the intersectoral collaboration. So, it's great when one company steps forward and does something, but it is impossible to measure the impact when you have companies that leverage their core competencies across multiple dimensions in pursuit of the same objective, which is to save lives. And that was evident in India. It's been evident in Southeast Asia, and we see it, frankly, all over the world as we try and engage in different ways to support the global response to the pandemic. The third thing I would say is, that public-private partnerships have enabled the progress we've made since early 2020, and they will ultimately be what get us through this pandemic. It is that combination of public sector, private sector, NGO, expertise, and also commitment that has made a difference, is making a difference today, and will make a difference as we work through what could be the hardest part of the pandemic, which is ensuring that all of the available vaccine doses are converted into vaccinations as quickly as possible, especially in low and medium income countries. So we've learned a lot. I think we've made a lot of progress, and I think that this is the path forward for responses like this.
Excellent. Nisha, anything you would add, reflections on the contributions from other private sector players in the task force and in global COVID response writ large?
Sure. All of this kind of came to a head in the spring of 2021 when India had its COVID crisis, and it was just a crisis of the likes of which we had not seen before in any country, with the massive scale of need that was emerging. And what it showed us was that it is often the private sector that provides the kind of early warning that something is not right, something is not well, and that governments need to pay attention. I would say that the private sector caught on earlier. The US Chamber, through our members in India, through our staff in India, Accenture, hearing from their teams in India, across India, hey, we're seeing the numbers tick up. Hey, we're seeing overwhelming of capacity. This is going to grow. This is going to grow. So that early warning that we were able to gain in India is something that we also saw happening in other geographies as the Delta variant kind of made its way around the world. Oftentimes, we would hear about the impacts in Southeast Asia or in Central America, in Mexico, before the US government necessarily picked up on it. And that is an important learning, because we do have people around the world who are in the right place at the right time to see what is happening in these communities and to be able to galvanize action. The other thing was that it fostered a new kind of public-private partnership where the private sector wasn't seen necessarily just in terms of mobilizing cash, but actually in mobilizing capacity. And that capacity that the private sector brings, the know-how, the facilities, the technology, that I think has been as important as the resources, the cash resources that have been mobilized. And so, it's how does the private sector do the problem solving? And I think that was a big learning through this COVID experience. And I think we're going to continue to see more opportunity to leverage private sector capabilities in solving public sector problems and challenges.
I couldn't agree more. And you used two of my favorite words there, capacity and capabilities. And I think the private sector really brought both to bear, and would love to dig into more of those as the panel goes on. But first, I want to pick up on something Mike said, which was around the catalytic impact of having CEOs involved. And Jill, I know Julie Sweet was really keen to be involved in Accenture's efforts here. I'd love to hear really tactically, what did it take to get that level of engagement from your senior leadership in this COVID response?
Well, you're right, Nick. I mean, the involvement of senior leadership in this task force, it is very striking. And I think it's actually one of the defining, features and a powerful legacy from this crisis. In our case, it came right from the top. And Julie Sweet, as she reviewed the incoming data on COVID cases amongst our own people back in April, and Nisha mentioned the sort of, the private sector sort of insight and data that we had. But, as she looked at that data and she realized what was happening, she also realized that, these employees that were being affected had families, they lived in communities that were also suffering, and there was going to be a sort of knock-on domino effect here, and she just felt that something different was going to be needed to make an impact in that context, and to do so rapidly. So, I mean, her approach was to reach out to other CEOs, and, you know, along with Arvind Krishna at IBM and Brad Smith at Microsoft and others, that, you know, they were able to mobilize this group of CEOs to form this task force. So, you know, each CEO sort of figured out and brought their own part to the equation, their own insights, their own resources and relationships. And I think, you know, that had a sort of knock-on effect back into our business, into our organization. Their visible engagement was obviously meaningful in mobilizing others, but it also sent a really powerful message inside our organization, and it set a really strong precedent for personal engagement of the C-suite. And I know, I mean, Julie has gone on record as saying that her involvement in the task force was one of the highlights of her career. And, you know, I think that's partly about the impact that was possible, but also partly because of the personal engagement and what was, you know, what flowed from that. Our chief HR officer was also part of the task force of HR leaders who similarly connected and mobilized, shared their insights, their local status on the ground, their thinking, and sometimes their experimentation, you know, on what could be done to support employees and their families, and knock on sort of benefits to the community. So, you know, new types of benefits, new ways of delivering those benefits, and needing to be able to do that without necessarily having precedents, you know, to do so. So I think, you know, it wasn't difficult to persuade people to contribute. I think the key was, you know, how do we bring the thing that we can offer, you know, the core capability of the business, where do we need to pull from inside our business to make this possible? How do we bring that together? And I think, you know, having that C-suite action from the front was really key in doing that.
Mike, maybe from where you sit at the Chamber Foundation, any other observations you have and how CEOs and other senior executives were involved from the various companies that participated in the task force?
Yeah, you know, I want to actually answer that by building on what Jill and Nisha have just said, because I think they're very complementary. This began at the CEO level. You know, there were multiple conversations among CEOs who were really, you know, there was just mounting concern about the emergence of the Delta variant and what that meant to the communities where they do business, to their employees, and to the world at large. And what they brought to those conversations, which it was a highlight of my career to even hear those conversations, was not just like, well, can we write a check and can someone else solve it? It really was what Nisha was talking about. How do we take our core capability as CEOs? Then how do we take the capabilities of our companies? And then how do we solve this? And, you know, I've just been really struck by the level of personal commitment from CEOs, but also their teams. You know, there were points early on in the Global Task Force where it felt like we were having a meeting every single day with Julie Sweet and Brad Smith and Arvind Krishna and folks from their teams. And now, you know, as our response has morphed in different ways, we're having similar conversations with different people who have different expertise that's required at this moment in the response. The one consistent thing is it's very rare that we have to ask someone for help. What we're frequently in the position of doing is how do we take all the different things that people want to do and compile them and align them in ways that allow us to maximize the impact. So we're summing the parts to produce a greater impact. And that is one of the most exciting parts of all of this.
That's really helpful. I want to build on that a bit by coming back to this question of capacity versus capabilities that Nisha had hinted at in her initial response. You know, if I think about those two, one of them is really a contribution of time and effort. The other is really a contribution of skills, know-how. Nisha, maybe to you first, if you think about the internal mechanics of how a private entity might participate in response, what did you see as examples of each of those things, the sort of capacity side and then also the broader capability side?
So, you know, normally companies are very focused on their core mission, and they've developed some core expertise in advancing that mission. What I saw was a willingness for companies to say, hey, we have these core capabilities, these areas of expertise, and we can reorient them to help address the critical needs and the gaps that we're seeing as we're looking at COVID. And so, for example, you would see a company say, we have facilities in 6 states where we could stand up, for example, health sites that we could help support both our workers, their family members, and their communities for, ways that we can help them to weather this and to take our, assets, our resources, and even sometimes our personnel, and refocus them towards meeting these urgent needs. And then, the ability to perhaps scale that, and the ability to leverage that, I think, speaks to, some of the ways in which kind of the capacity of a Julie Sweet or an Arvind Krishna to leverage a vast infrastructure in a country to help support these kinds of needs. So it was just an extraordinary experience, because it was not the normal silo in which we tend to think about CSR and social impact as things, ways in which we give back to a community. This was actually a little bit even more existential to how do we help tackle this problem that we are all experiencing together, right? And so it was solving for the business, the community, and the larger kind of country all at once. And it's just an extraordinary learning in how these executives were able to take their core business and apply that towards a completely unique and different set of challenges.
That is great. Thank you. I want to come back to Jill on the capacity side of this and how you engage the employees of Accenture. I know from some of our past conversations, you've mentioned that you even seconded people to this effort and really made the most of the capacity that they wanted to bring to bear. How did you do that? How did you engage the workforce generally, the hundreds of thousands of Accenture employees you mentioned, and what specifically did it look like for some of these secondees to participate?
Well, it wasn't difficult to find people who wanted to help, for obvious reasons. So it was much more about how were we going to channel, the interest, the energy, the compassion that was, coming from so many places across Accenture. And, at a sort of rather mechanical level, we formed various task forces. We had a task force who liaised with the global task force in these meetings, these regular meetings, and we drew on our employees and our people from, our supply chain business and practice, from communications, from human resources, and so on. So, people participated in that way. We had steering groups and task forces in the local countries, again, pulling on particular expertise that we needed. And we had employees put up their hands to join those, and really trying to find a very agile way of doing that, of bringing employees into the place where their skills could be applied at any one time was something that, at a global level, we spent quite a lot of time trying to figure out. Ultimately, we had folk from our legal teams, we had folk from our finance teams helping to process funding. We had our procurement leaders looking at how we could bring surge capacity to purchase goods and equipment, where there were barriers or blockages in place through the business as usual processes. And, the last thing we did with our employees, because, many were not in the places where they could actually physically help, was we launched a giving campaign. And, you know, our people are smart, they're informed, and they watch this situation unfolding in their own countries, in other countries. And we mobilized what has become the largest ever global employee giving campaign at Accenture. And I think one of the characteristics of this whole period, whether it's bringing core capabilities or mobilizing the sort of individual action and passion of our people, was really the idea that global is local and local is global. Because those, you know, they merged very much during this period. And the ability to be able to operate across multiple countries and to coordinate and orchestrate in multiple places, but at the same time become very, very local in impact and decision making and so on, was really, really key. And even when it came to our employee giving, to be able to mobilize 624,000 people, but to channel the funds to the local organizations in the local communities and make sure that they reach the place of greatest need. You know, that was an exercise in moving from the global to the local and back again all the time. So we wanted to make sure that the funds being raised were reaching these communities. We worked with our partner Benevity with a giving platform to do that. And ultimately our people raised over $1 million, which Accenture matched to these local organizations. And we did this initially in India, but then replicated the model in other cases. But what we have as a result of that now is a model that we can lift and drop into other situations. So, you know, to answer your question, Nick, around our employees, you know, it was a range of ways in which we pulled them in. And it was really about the agility to kind of do that at the right time in the right place, and to not be constrained by the local and global you know, geographies, but to try and sort of work across all of them at the same time.
That is great. The way you balanced global and local, the way you engaged a global workforce to contribute in many different ways is a great example of what this can look like at a company the size of Accenture. Mike and Nisha, any other best practices come to mind in terms of employee engagement of some of the other task force participants?
I'll let Nisha go because she had a unique vantage point as the president of the U.S.-India Business Council. She has employees in India when we were doing this response who were also helping with the response.
Well, and I think, thanks, Mike. And I think, you know, one, we did have the experience of most of our team in India at some point in the early part of this year actually came down with COVID. So it was something that affected us as much as we were also trying to affect the trajectory of the pandemic and support the response. But what it did tell us was some of the critical needs that emerged, right? And we had firsthand experience, and I think Accenture certainly could speak to this. I mean, part of the CHRO group grew out of our understanding that our teams needed support and their families needed support, and that as hospitals were overwhelmed, the more that we could find ways to support them through, you know, getting essential items to them in their homes through telemedicine and counseling and, you know, essentially mobilizing resources, the more that we were going to be able to have the capacity we needed to help others. And so that became a big learning through our teams, that we needed to, one, practice self-care for our teams, and then two, to be able to activate our teams to be able to then help others and be part of the response.
Thanks, Nisha. We have a little under 10 minutes left, and I'd love to shift focus for our remaining time to forward looking. I think this has been a great retrospective. Mike, I want to come to you first because you hinted at this already in one of your prior responses, but there's still a tremendous need globally to make sure that vaccines become vaccinations. What role do you think the private sector can play in supporting that in other geographies beyond those that have been supported in the task force?
It's a great question, Nick. And I think that the role that the private sector can play is almost limitless. This is my assessment, right, is that we don't have a money problem. You know, the doses are being purchased, at least in the near term. The doses are being delivered. What we are going to run into is a significant distribution, logistical, and administration challenge. And what that's going to require is a new level of commitment from all facets of society. You know, we spend a lot of time talking to companies that want to know, how can I help? And, you know, there are really basic things that you can do. And, you know, as Jill was saying, like making sure that there is funding available to the local organizations that are dealing with these last mile challenges. But there are also macro challenges. You know, one is that this has to remain a priority for developed nations, even as they get their populations, the relative vaccination rates are much higher. Because this is a global threat, and COVID anywhere is COVID everywhere, as the now cliche goes. So companies can do a few things. You know, we've been talking a lot about the global task force in using the past tense, but our work continues. We procured more than $50 million worth of oxygen and other supplies for countries that have had emergency needs. But we've also recognized that that's not a scalable solution. So one of the things that we've been prioritizing is connecting people with support to people who need the support. And some of that, you know, is what seems like really basic things. For example, cold chain logistics is a huge issue in low and medium income countries because they don't have the necessary infrastructure to handle some of the vaccines that require special storage or transportation. So what we've done is we've brought together companies that have developed their own systems, companies that are not logistics companies, but as part of their daily operations have come up with ways to implement a cold storage system, to talk to government officials about ways that you can come up with creative solutions. We're also working with secondees from companies that have stepped up to develop things like a matchmaking tool so that we can identify countries with specific needs and companies that have specific capabilities or capacity that they're prepared to offer in those countries. And then the third thing that companies can do is that they can try and deepen their engagement with ministries of health at the national level or health agencies at the local level to ensure that there is a clear line of communication. One of the most astute observations I heard actually occurred earlier in the pandemic as the US was struggling to get vaccines out the door and into arms. And that was that we had people in the government talking, and they needed specifics from the companies about what they were offering. And then we had people in the companies that wanted to help that needed specifics from the governments in terms of what they needed. But both were really busy and both were speaking different languages. So the more that companies can do to recognize that challenge and overcome it, the better.
Great. Thank you for outlining all of that. So last question, and I would love to hear from all three of you on this. Based on the successes that we've seen through this increased level of coordination and collaboration of private sector players in COVID response, how do you envision corporate citizenship will evolve in response to future disasters, health emergencies, and humanitarian crises going forward? And maybe Jill, will start with you.
Sure. Well, at the risk of repeating again, I think just this lesson learned around the application of core capabilities and the collaboration. You know, we've spoken about it, but I think it's worth repeating in terms of you know, looking forward. I think that's just going to be a model that sticks and stays. And you know, hopefully the pandemic is not to be repeated soon, but the interconnectedness and the complexity of our world is likely to demand, you know, these sort of more sophisticated responses in future. And, you know, in an age of climate change, you know, that's going to be absolutely essential. So I think looking forward, I think it's a change that that we need to continue to pursue. And I think this this idea of the overlap between employees and the wider community and the connection between the two. I think that's something else that is probably here to stay. Accenture is a people-based organization, so it was especially clear for us, but I think, I know that from speaking with peers in other companies, the same was true. And with the rise of health and well-being as a material issue for many companies, but also, because the boundaries are more blurred between the workplace and home in so many ways, I think that continuing integration is going to need to be part of the thinking about corporate citizenship, about how we engage with communities and about the sorts of contributions we make. I guess just a couple of other thoughts. I think, the very agile way in which this was executed, and I think it was Nisha that mentioned around the sort of evolving governance. I think, again, thinking about how we respond to these situations in very agile ways and evolve the models of engagement, the bringing of these capabilities and capacities over time as things evolve, I think is a very useful lesson to take forward and to apply. And perhaps lastly, and this does bring us back again to collaboration, but the importance of established partnerships and the trust that exists within those partnerships and relationships. So, being able to mobilize quickly, the task force to mobilize quickly was to a large extent because of the trust that existed, at the Business Roundtable and the Chamber, built up relationships over time that could be leveraged, and the insights that can be brought from the local to the global and so on. So I think, we've always, I'm sure all of us have always worked in partnership, but I think the importance of the trust in those partnerships to being able to mobilize and to do things in a different way with these different contexts, I think is critical. So, we were able to achieve more when we collaborate using our unique and complementary capabilities, insights, and resources, and we need to keep doing that.
Absolutely. That trust and the value of collaboration are important. Certainly the agility in response here. You mentioned climate, and what's interesting is, in the context of a very acute health crisis where timely action was really required, that agility mattered. I'm really struck by COP26 and the level of corporate participation and commitments. So maybe in our last minute, Mike and Nisha, on climate and other topics that are bigger, longer term, maybe not as acute as a global pandemic, how do you see the role of corporate citizenship evolving?
Corporations are increasingly aware that for them to be able to be financially sustainable, they need to exist in communities that are sustainable, socially sustainable, environmentally sustainable, and economically sustainable. And so you are seeing increasingly that companies are deeply invested in ensuring that the communities in which they operate, the communities from which they source, the communities in which they work, that those communities are also thriving communities. And so I think you're seeing a completely different approach to corporate citizenship, which is less philanthropic in nature and more essentially sustainment, that we have to be part of a community and part of helping it to thrive. And that, I think, is the next step and an important evolution in how we think about what it means to be a corporate citizen.
Excellent. And I'm getting the proverbial hook. I think we're out of time. Mike, I apologize I didn't get to your response there, but I want to thank all three of you, Jill, Mike, Nisha, for sharing your insight, your observations, even some of your predictions for the future. I think this has been a really great discussion and greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Nick.
you.
name's Jeff Terry. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility and Sustainability at GAF Materials Corporation. You know, GAF is North America's largest roofing and weatherproofing company. And last year in 2020, it was an honor to receive the Citizens Award for the Best Disaster Response and Resilience Program. You know, at our core, we believe in helping to build resilient communities. So a recognition of that was a true honor. And we really want to thank our good friends at Good 360 who nominated us for that award as well. So, you know, this award is a really important part of the Citizens Award, you know, in light of the ongoing pandemic, as well as the implications we're seeing with climate change. This award is only going to get more and more important. And we're excited to have 3 incredible finalists this year that are all incredible potential recipients of this award. So with that, let's take a look at our 3 finalists.
The finalists for the 2021 Best Disaster Response and Community Resilience Program Award are General Motors. Amid the swift spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, the demand for medical equipment, specifically ventilators and PPE, rapidly outpaced supply. GM recognized its unique supply chain relationships and ability to quickly scale manufacturing and stepped in to support the effort, with ventilators needed to treat seriously ill patients. GM partnered with Ventec Life Systems to build more than 30,000 ventilators at GM's Kokomo, Indiana manufacturing facility. Additionally, more than 5,000 employees volunteered to make and distribute more than 7 million masks across the country. The PepsiCo Foundation. Recognizing the massive spikes in hunger brought about by COVID-19 and the pandemic's threat to long-term food security, the PepsiCo Foundation leveraged PepsiCo's vast resources and expertise in sourcing, packaging, and delivering food around the world to create a global hunger-fighting initiative. They worked with employees, NGOs and community organizations, and local governments to expand impact on the ground, ultimately supporting more than 1,000 communities, delivering more than 145 million meals, and providing more than $71 million in funding and donations to global partners. Walgreens. The Walgreens Vaccine Equity Initiative aims to address and overcome access barriers to the COVID-19 vaccine, especially in underserved communities. Walgreens partnered with hundreds of community groups, rapidly implementing over 1,200 vaccination events and administering millions of vaccines in underserved communities. Additionally, Walgreens launched multiple education campaigns to reach hesitant audiences, sharing accurate information, building trust in the vaccine, and demonstrating the value of pharmacy in healthcare delivery and outcomes.
A very impressive display of all the wonderful work done by this year's finalists. My name is Will Powell, and I'm a senior coordinator here at the Chamber Foundation's Corporate Citizenship Center. Congratulations to the 2021 finalists of the Best Community Resilience and Disaster Response Program. It's time to announce the winner. And the winner of this year's Best Community Resilience and Disaster Response Program is General Motors. Congratulations.
We are so incredibly honored to receive the Citizens Award. At General Motors, supporting the communities in which we live and work is ingrained in everything we do. So getting this recognition is very special. In 2020, in the very early stages of the pandemic, our CEO, Mary Barra, empowered the team to be innovative and to mobilize our teams to find ways GM could support the country during this time of crisis, truly giving all of us a strong sense of pride and purpose. With speed and urgency, thousands of General Motors employees, from factory workers to IT professionals to senior executives, worked around the clock to help save lives. As the crisis unfolded, our teams used their expertise to move from making vehicles to sourcing, making, and delivering more than 30,000 critical care ventilators in just 154 days. In 10 days, we retooled a facility to manufacture PPE like masks, gowns, and face shields. Our employees stepped up when they were called upon. More than 5,000 employees volunteered their time to make and distribute face masks. In total, we donated more than 7 million surgical and N95 masks to local hospitals, first responders, and schools across the United States. We now refer to this as ventilator speed. Personally, I was so proud to support the team from here in Washington, D.C., where we worked around the clock with FDA, FEMA, and so many more to receive the necessary approvals for our PPE and the delivery of ventilators. It was an incredibly rewarding experience, knowing that during such a stressful time in our country, I could do something to help. On behalf of all of us at General Motors, I sincerely thank you for this great recognition today.
When the second wave of COVID happened in India, a coalition of corporations came together and formed the Global Task Force for Pandemic Response.
The task force initiative was to make sure that these ventilators can be made available to the Indian population in big numbers and in big centers, thereby being able to serve significant amount of patient population. My role started from day one when we were getting in touch with Amazon India, which was actually leading the efforts on behalf of USIBC.
There were many working parts in that initial order that came in on how we were going to do it, how we were going to pack up these ventilators, how we were going to secure freight space in what was a very impacted freight market as well, how we were going to get this cleared into the custom, which is, India is typically a long customs clearance time.
We not only committed the logistics and the supply chain of getting ventilators to India as fast as possible, but we also further committed the expertise of our team on the ground to do this installation, the configuration, and the service.
The ventilators which I have installed were delivered in the smallest city of India called as Goa. The ventilators which are allocated to my region reaches the hospital, then it has to be taken to the ICU. The installation takes place, and post the installation we have to train the doctors how to use the ventilator.
Also the back-end support staff like biomedical engineers to maintain and troubleshooting the ventilators. A large quantity were new models, so we had to train more than 1,000 healthcare professionals from different hospitals in a very short time. We provide the different format of trainings that include live Zoom trainings, Ventilator Academy website, and we also prepare 27 pre-recorded training video.
And we really felt that with the time zones, we were handing the baton, and we as Medtronic were working 24 hours in order to get ventilators into India as fast as possible.
You have to remember that the delivery of these from Chennai to different parts of India was happening during COVID surges. Medtronic folks are going into those locations to deliver and install on an ongoing basis. They were doing it in COVID hotspots.
So we made an aim to save more patients by installing the ventilators come what may.
So that's what kept me going, and that's what kept a lot of us going.
I was on a call very late, and my son came up to me and asked me why couldn't I take him to bed and read him a story? And I explained to him what I was doing, and he watches the news, he's aware of what's going on, and he just said to me, "Good job, Daddy," and he went off to bed quite happy. So that was me knowing I'm doing the right thing.
We are able to save a lot of lives by doing our bit. So I feel great. It has been a challenging task, but we are taking the pandemic head on, and we are going to win this war.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back again for another timely conversation. Over the last several months, we've seen the impact of COVID, not only here in our own country, but countries around the world. And as you've heard, when India started to experience a rapid rise in COVID-19 cases, we knew as a business community we had to act. And I've been doing this a long time, and I've never seen anything quite like it. The launch of the Global Task Force on Pandemic Response back in May was a result of this amazing collaboration between so many dozens of these companies and a few select nonprofits. The businesses in the coalition mobilized over $46 million to assist in India. and it took immediate actions to help. We delivered 1,000 ventilators, as you saw in the video. We've also delivered over 30,000 oxygen concentrators to the country. And as the video illustrated, this was not easy, but all the companies involved, especially Medtronic, were driven by a common goal. It was rooted in their corporate purpose. It's an honor here to be joined by Bob White. He's the Executive Vice President and President of the Medical Surgical Portfolio for Medtronic. And he's here to talk about the power of purpose. And he'll provide a deeper look into how the company leans into its sense of purpose to make such a difference. Bob, it's just so great to have you join us this afternoon.
Oh, Mark, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. Let's get into the first question, Bob. So what led Medtronic to make the decision to join the effort and to organize around this cause and go from donation partner to assuming responsibility for implementation?
Yeah, well, Mark, thanks. We were honored to be pulled in to the effort by Amazon and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, two outstanding organizations. And that initial involvement with Amazon and the U.S. Chamber led to a great partnership. And for us, as you mentioned, it really starts with our mission, right? Our mission to alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life is really what drives us. And if you think about it, we're privileged in that 2 people every second around the world benefit from a Medtronic therapy. So just in the few minutes that we're going to talk together, thousands of people will benefit from a Medtronic therapy. And from the beginning, we knew we had a role to play in the pandemic response. And for us, it came down to 3 things. It was ramping, sharing, and innovating. And ramping meant ramping meant increasing our ventilator production 5-fold from what it was. And sharing, the broad steps we took to put on the web and open source the intellectual property for the ventilator design for our PB560, because we knew the world needed to respond to this. And finally, sharing some really innovative things, including the relationship that we formed here with the U.S. Chamber and Amazon to deliver ventilators where they were needed most. So it was an amazing effort from a team across the world, Mark.
Yeah, Bob, I mean, I remember those early days being in all those calls, and your CEO was involved. Jeff Murtha was in on this from the very beginning.
He really was. We were having daily calls in the morning and in the evening, on the phone with the White House task force governors in the U.S., but also around the world. And so really the whole organization aligned around what can Medtronic do to help respond.
Yeah, and the other thing that really struck me was not all the pieces were in one place, right? And Medtronic amazingly assembled these machines. Some were here, some were in Ireland, some were in other parts of Southeast Asia, because you just can't plug and play a Medtronic ventilator here in the U.S. to a hospital in India.
No, you're absolutely right, Mark. Look, a high-end ventilator like the PB980 has 1,750 parts, right? So it's a complex electromechanical device. We manufacture them in Galway, but the supply chain is around the world. And then as we formed the partnership with the U.S. Chamber and Amazon, we knew these vents needed to be delivered into India in some of the most remote places around the world. And we had to coordinate that globally. And as the video said, Kwan and her team just did an amazing job on literally a 24-hour clock to make sure we got these vents where they needed to be.
And for the audience, it truly was a 24-hour effort. I would wake up every morning and open my WhatsApp app, and there were pictures of ventilators being installed in hospitals all over India by the Medtronic technicians. It was really remarkable.
It was nice. And one of the things you realize is it's about having the people on the ground who know the region intimately, right? Who could make sure that we could get the vents to the right places. And so that involved working with government authorities, local hospitals, making sure the clinicians were trained appropriately. So it was really a team effort to do it.
Yeah. And Bob, I mean, your background, you were in charge of the emerging markets business in Singapore for quite some time, and you've seen how difficult it can be to do something like this. Tell us some of the other obstacles and challenges and how Medtronic overcame them.
Well, thanks, Mark. Look, some of the things we take for granted in the U.S. or in other large developed markets just doesn't exist from an infrastructure standpoint in these emerging markets. And so first will come back to our people and their commitment to just the purpose of doing the right thing, because when you're on the ground, you have a way to see your way through obstacles. That was first. And then two, it was really great collaboration with NGOs, with government authorities, and with corporate partners to ensure that not only did the vents get to those places where they were needed most, but then the training of the clinicians and the ICU staff was done. Because the worst thing you'd want is for a vent to show up and not be used. And the opposite happened. The team executed not only the last mile of delivery, but the training to make sure that they could immediately be put on patients. And that's a lot more challenging than waking up in the US, but the team was incredibly responsive and just constantly figured out ways to overcome challenges.
Yeah, and one of those challenges was because it was a hotspot. The Medtronic technicians, they were at risk when they did all of this work, and they put their personal safety aside to do for the greater good.
Mark, you're so right, and it does kind of come down to this power with a purpose, right? I mean, this was power with purpose because our employees in India knew it could be their mother, their father, their aunt, their uncle, right, that was going to benefit from this therapy. And the resiliency, the resourcefulness, and the passion to just respond and deliver life-saving equipment like this was amazing.
So with that, Bob, what do you think sets Medtronic apart and enables you to respond in such a way for the ventilators or for other initiatives around the globe?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think it's three things. One, size and scale matters, right? We've got 90,000 employees around the world. We treat 70 different therapies in the body. We've got, we spent over $2.5 billion on R&D. We've got 300 clinical trials. So size and scale matters here because we were able to mobilize Medtronic, not just in a small operating unit, but across. So that's the first one. The second one, and it's the way we started, Mark, it's the commitment to the culture. The authentic response to our employees to alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life was so authentic. And that really drove it. And it allowed our teams to break down silos and just really focus on the problem at hand. And the third thing I would say was the speed and agility. Mark, literally what would previously have taken us months took weeks, what would take weeks took days, and how the team rallied to respond. So I think those three things really kind of help set the team apart.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned speed and agility, Bob, because it's the one thing that really struck me when I said I've never seen anything quite like it. It was speed and agility from the beginning to get the companies assembled, for the companies to make the donations so we could afford to run the program, for Medtronic to work with the shippers. And we haven't mentioned this in depth, but it really was remarkable to me is the ability of the government of India to plug in, right?
Mark, I think you're absolutely right. And it was so heartwarming to see because sometimes we can be critical of governments and their response. And I think we saw the very best out of India here as well, realizing the crisis that was on hand. How do they respond? And I thought it was amazing. And, I think we all leave this, well, not through the pandemic, so don't take me the wrong way, but I think there are real durable lessons that whether you're in the private sector and the public sector that you can take away from this that will make us better, going forward.
Agreed, Bob. And durability, right? It's these styles and ventilators just weren't or are not just only being used to help COVID patients. They're there to stay.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And, we hope the pandemic passes, but the reality is people need assistance from a ventilator to breathe, right? That's what a vent does. It helps you breathe, right? It takes over for your lungs. And so it's a critical piece of intensive care equipment.
And that's what we heard from the government of India, where some of these hospitals, they didn't have access to ventilators and didn't think they would for any time in the future. So now they have, this great piece of life-saving equipment that they can use for years on end.
Yeah, it's absolutely right, Mark. And, I was just recently learned of a story from a patient I want to share with you. And, Nagaland is in a very mountainous region of India in the northeast corner, and it's very difficult. And so if you think about when wave 2 of the pandemic was hitting, thousands of people were being afflicted with the disease daily. Right. And then, of course, you're seeing hundreds of thousands of people die from this. And we learned a story recently of an 80-year-old man who was in a very remote village was brought to the hospital in Nagaland and was brought to the ICU, was tried to sustain there, but they couldn't hold his oxygen levels. And so he was put on a PB980, one of the ventilators that were installed. And after a week, regained and was able then to go home. And, you realize through the care of his physician and the PB980 that his life was saved. And that's what inspires the thousands of Medtronic employees every day to wake up and save a life. And I love the email that his physician sent us. It kind of closed with the phrase of stay healthy, stay safe, and keep in the service of humanity. And that's what this was about, right? And that was why we're so grateful of the partnership with the US Chamber, with Amazon. It really came together to help save lives. And when we can do that every day, we feel pretty good about that.
Well, we feel good about it too, Bob. And we want to thank you and all your colleagues at Medtronic for what you've done to make the world a better place with the ventilators, but also everything else you do all year long. Bob, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. It's a real privilege.
And before we go to the next session, I'd be remiss not to recognize all the companies that did provide the financial resources to bring the ventilator program to India. I'll leave you all with an exit slide listing these generous corporations. Thank you.
Welcome everyone to today's Business Solves panel exploring multi-sector partnerships that help protect the globe and strengthen global health. My name is Jennifer Latito. I am the president and COO of RED, nonprofit founded by Bono and Bobby Shriver that partners with the world's biggest brands to create RED products and experiences, all of which raise money for the Global Fund, one of the world's largest funders of global health. We have a fantastic panel assembled here, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce today's participants. Dr. Julie Gerberding, Chief Patient Officer and Executive Vice President, Population Health and Sustainability at Merck. Jeremy Konyndyk, Executive Director, USAID COVID-19 Task Force. And Wes Wheeler, President of UPS Healthcare. Thank you all so much for joining us. I know our time is tight, so Jeremy, I'm going to just dive right in and start with you. USAID has had a long history of leadership combating infectious diseases like COVID-19, Ebola, and others around the globe. Tell us about the pivotal role you are playing in fulfilling vaccination goals and the partnerships that are helping to meet these goals. Over to you, Jeremy.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, and it's a real pleasure to be speaking to this group today. The partnerships that we have with the private sector and with the nonprofit sector, as well as with organizations like the Global Fund, are so central to everything that we do and anything that we achieve on the global scene as the U.S. government. And obviously for USAID, those are really critical relationships as well. So the president has laid out a really ambitious vision for vaccinating the world. He has talked about the U.S. being the arsenal of vaccines for the global vaccination effort, and that's what we are delivering on now. So the administration has committed to provide at least 1.2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines around the world. Obviously, that's more than we will consume domestically. So we're stepping up in an enormous way, and we're doing that with the partnership and the involvement of a lot of different organizations. So obviously a lot of those doses build on the public-private partnerships that the U.S. government entered into over the past few years in generating the vaccines and producing the vaccines in the first place. at ground level, they're also we're working with private sector partners to help deliver those vaccines, to promote vaccine uptake and confidence, and that builds on, I think, a long history, as you've said, of USAID partnering with private sector companies in our global health efforts on things like everything from messaging, public messaging, to supply chain. There's really no way that we can execute on the scale and the ambition of what we need to achieve collectively as a world over the next year to begin getting back to normal without a really tight partnership and engagement between the public sector and the private sector. And so we're working hard on all fronts to do that, with public sector, with partners like UNICEF, Global Fund, Gavi, but also trying to be as hand in glove as possible with private sector partners. And we've been working a lot with the Chamber and BCG and other private sector partners in the last few months to really scale up our level of engagement there.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. It is such a massive undertaking, as you mentioned. Julie, I'm going to go to you next. Merck has been on the front lines of the biggest public health emergencies in recent history. And just, for full disclosure, as the head of RED, I just want to say Merck has been an incredible RED supporter and has played an invaluable role in helping us in our efforts to bring critical awareness to the global AIDS crisis, and the need to fund efforts that will help end the HIV pandemic, which is obviously something RED has been doing for the past 15 years. But in the case of COVID-19, you have collaborated to make vaccines for a competitor in Johnson & Johnson, and you've partnered with a small company in Ridgeback to develop oral antiviral medication for the disease. I'm just curious if you can tell us how Merck is using partnerships to help contain the pandemic in these extraordinary times.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say that red is my favorite color. So we appreciate all you're doing for that effort as well. I think partnership is the theme word of this entire pandemic. When you think about, for any of the important countermeasures that have come forward, it has really taken the entire ecosystem of partnerships, from academia, where a number of the early discoveries were made, to small biotech companies that have really gone at risk to really push the envelope on innovation, to the government funding and the government research that's gone on in several countries, and especially in the United States. But then also bringing in the larger pharmaceutical companies who not only are innovators, but can really help accelerate the scaling. I think it would be impossible to imagine that we would have the supply of vaccines that we have today if it really weren't for the larger pharmaceutical companies who not only have the know-how and the experience, but have the scale and, in a sense, the ability to take the financial risk that kind of adding this additional capacity really puts in play. None of this is fully de-risked, even though I think our government has done so much to try to help make sure that the capital is there to do the manufacturing expansion and the overall access planning. So I think that segment of partnerships in creating and developing and then manufacturing the important countermeasures that we've already been able to take advantage of has been really critical. But of course, there's a whole other kind of partnership that's also been relevant to all of us. And that includes the large scale partnerships like Warp Speed or COVAX, and then hopefully, ultimately, soon to be developed, or at least hoped to be developed, partnerships that will really complete that last mile where we actually get vaccine in the arms of the people who need it the most, especially in the least resource areas of the world. So I think, when this is all said and done, we really need to examine these partnerships and understand how can we really, truly learn from these experiences and embed them in a different way of operating broadly to solve some of the other global health problems that we have.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this pandemic has brought out the best of companies. So, companies who are competitors are working together as collaborators. It's really fascinating. And to your point, let's hope that we can look back and maybe bring some of it forward in the future. So Wes, I'm going to come over to you. UPS Healthcare has played a critical role facilitating COVID-19 vaccine delivery around the world, which is a huge and historic task, and one that we could probably spend hours talking about. But how are you working with partners, to ensure equity in your efforts? Oh, Wes, I think you're muted. It's always got to be someone.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, I was unmuted. Anyway, thanks very much, Jennifer. I appreciate it. Listening to the last segment, it took me back actually before vaccines. So we were very, very much involved in Project Airbridge. So our first partner was actually FEMA and the US government, getting PPE and even ventilators and all kinds of equipment, mainly out of China. We moved about 26 million pounds of PPE into our facilities in the US, into the national stockpile. We had 250 charter aircraft, 747s with our pilots coming in every single day, sometimes twice a day, just delivering that kind of material in. So our first partner really was the federal government. We got involved in clinical trials pretty much after that, about April of that year. We had a good insight based on the protocols that were being published publicly. We got to see how many patients would be recruited. It gave me a really good clue that we would be rapidly developing this vaccine, more so than I've ever seen in my career. So we got involved right away with developing supply routes, things that we thought would happen, manufacturing sources around the world. We got involved very, very early with Operation Warp Speed. We became a pretty much an equal partner with the federal government, with General Perna and his team. The thing that really worked in the US from an equity standpoint is that early on, an algorithm was created by the government, I think managed by the CDC, to give every state an allocation based on an equal algorithm based on population. And based on that, the allocations were created every single day when we launched in December 15th of that year. And against that allocation, every state was allowed to order against that allocation. And that ordering process was managed by Operation Warp Speed. And the UPS and FedEx split the country, and we did that equitably. We had 50% on either side of the country. We worked alongside with McKesson on the kits. We built the dry ice factory, and we worked every single, well, for a while, every day, and then even to this day, every week, with the government, with McKesson, with Pfizer, with Moderna, and with, of course, our FedEx competitor at this time was a team. And that sense of teamwork made it all work. And to this day, with all the mapping of all the lanes and all this capacity we carved out, even during peak season, during the worst nor'easter we've seen in years, we were able to deliver to the US population, and now nearly 70% of the population over 18 is vaccinated. We're very, very proud of that. Now pivot from there to the rest of the world. And since then, we've actually delivered twice as much to the rest of the world that we have to the US. We've now delivered, as of yesterday, 906 million doses to 107 countries at 99.9% on time by day. We're extremely proud of that. And the reason why it happened that way is because we did the planning up front with full transparency from the federal government. And of course, with Pfizer being the lead in the development of their vaccine, they actually went out, as countries were approved around the world, they were selecting by country the proper distribution partner. So we got about half the world from Pfizer, and our competitors got the other half. And so as the approvals came in, the allocations were made, the orders were placed, and we worked hand in glove with Pfizer as the primary decision maker in how distribution happened. And because of that, we've been able to maintain that on-time performance. Now, the reason why I bring all that up is because pivot now to COVAX and the African Union and the distribution of other countries of the Moderna and the Janssen vaccines, et cetera, we need to make sure we follow the same kind of process. That's the process that worked. Allocate by the WHO or COVAX or both, allow UNICEF to make proper team decisions based on who's the best distributor in that country, and then let us take care of the details. That means first mile, last mile, middle airlift, and then make sure that we're getting the last mile completely covered, the last inch, right down to delivering freezers in Africa to make sure they can keep these medicines on stability right up until the very end. And in many cases, we've got to get delivery within 48 hours in order to maintain stability. So the lessons from the US need to be applied to the rest of the world, in my opinion.
Well, sitting here in New York City, I'm very grateful for the efforts that you made to ensure all of us are stayed safe in the beginning and continue to stay safe. And to your point, let's see how we can continue that for the rest of the world, which is so important. So the pandemic has understandably dominated the headlines for so long that I feel like we've sort of lost track of how many critical and present healthcare issues there are beyond the COVID-19 crisis. How has COVID-19 impacted people returning to care for routine vaccinations, important screenings, and ongoing therapies? Julie, I'm going to start with you.
Boy, this is really an important question. I think just a couple of weeks ago, the WHO reported that more than 20 million children did not receive their needed measles dose last year. And that means inevitably there will be measles outbreaks because that is such a highly infectious disease and for way too many children, a highly fatal disease on a global basis. So that's just kind of the one snapshot of the nature of the problem. But it isn't a problem that's just limited to developing areas of the world. It's a problem in our own communities in the most developed countries. And the reason for that, it's complicated actually, because in one part, our health systems at times were undersurged and really unable to provide routine care services. People were sequestered in their homes, unable to go out to receive the care. And while you can get a lot done with telehealth, if you have broadband and are sophisticated user of digital technologies, but you can't get your mammogram on your cell phone, you can't get your colonoscopy or a number of the other really important cancer screening efforts. So we've fallen way behind. And that means that cancers are being diagnosed later than they would have been. And that means that treatments are necessarily more complex and we'll see less success in delaying or curing many of these cancers. But we're also even seeing chronic diseases that are managed with tablets or routine primary care monitoring also move people into higher risk categories, increased demand for renal dialysis among patients with diabetes, and excess cardiovascular and stroke risk in the United States, independent of the additional morbidity brought on by COVID per se. So I could go on, but I think we get the picture that the toll of the pandemic isn't just due to the virus and its direct effects on health. It's the ripple effect from the lack of the ability to contain and sustain the usual elements of care. And of course, I should add into that list of reasons the fact that people who are really suffering financial hardships or have lost their insurance or their jobs during this really are in a place where they absolutely cannot access care, even if they're well-intentioned and know they need it. So I think one of the lessons for me personally, since I spent a great deal of my time in government service, thinking about how to prepare our nation for a pandemic from a medical health perspective, that when we're thinking about that, we have to think much more broadly than just the threat that has emerged. And we have to think of it in the context of broader healthcare needs, social determinants of health, but even more broadly than that, to assure that we provide the financial support necessary to keep people going while they deal with the non-pharmacologic interventions and all of the other disruptions of their life that this pandemic has imposed. Lots of learning here. And of course, as much as I'd like to be optimistic about the way ahead, we are definitely not through this pandemic. We're coming into a season where people get distracted by holidays. We may see a surge in COVID because of the holiday season, and that often tends to make people delay their routine primary care even more. So as families are coming together, I would really urge people to think about how can we be good family supporters of returning to care, and how can we all be good ambassadors of reminding our networks, whether it's our employees, our colleagues, our friends and our families, that it's a really good idea to get back into the routine of receiving your normal healthcare services, including your cancer screenings and your other vaccinations, including a flu shot, I might add.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. Those are all really good points. I mean, it's interesting, and this is happening everywhere. I was actually, coincidentally, I was doing a panel this morning with our beneficiaries in Zambia, and they were having, there are slide backs that could happen with HIV, something that we've obviously been very focused on because people are afraid to go into the healthcare clinics. So I think that is, all of the points that you made are so true and really need to be a focus. Jeremy, I'm going to come to you next. So what is happening in global health beyond COVID-19 crisis that we should be paying attention to from your side?
Well, picking up on some of what Julie said, I think what we have seen in this crisis is how much when we have to do an emergency response of this type and on this scale, we have to do that with the assets that exist. We don't have some big reserve army of healthcare workers and healthcare assets that's sitting on a shelf somewhere that can just roll out. We work through the systems that exist. And so the core baseline investments that the world makes in global health services are what we also put into frontline use during a pandemic. And so, for example, much of the diagnostic capacity that's been built up through HIV/AIDS interventions over the past few decades was then repurposed and refocused to do COVID diagnostics in PEPFAR countries. We've seen that obviously the workforce that is treating the COVID patients is the same workforce that needs to treat HIV patients and TB patients and do routine immunization. And so there has been a lot of disruption. I think it's been mitigated well in some instances. HIV hasn't taken as big of a hit in terms of enrollment in services that as we feared it might. ARV coverage has still been pretty robust. TB has taken more of a hit. And we've seen a real hit to some of the routine immunization programs. I think we're going to continue to see that. And one of the things to watch over the year ahead as the global vaccination effort scales up will be the bandwidth trade-offs for developing countries between doing COVID vaccination and doing their routine immunization. I think another thing we're seeing is a huge strain on healthcare workers, and obviously we're seeing this in our own country. There was a Washington Post story just yesterday about huge strain on health workers and a lot of people thinking about leaving the profession because the last 2 years have been so rough. Similar challenges in many countries, and of course in a lot of developing countries, they still have large unvaccinated portions of not just their population but their health workforce. So you can't draw a clean line, I think, between COVID and the wider global health impacts, because it's all at the end of the day kind of one workforce, one system, one set of resources, and we really need to think carefully about how we protect and preserve that system.
Absolutely. And Wes, over to you from a UPS perspective. Anything from a global health perspective you guys are focused on? Anything else?
I'll answer with two items. First of all, we're very involved with clinical trials. We have a subsidiary that focuses on clinical trial logistics, and including home healthcare support during the trial. We're already seeing a major pivot to this sort of light speed approach to getting vaccines and specialty biologics approved by the authorities, FDA and others. I think we have to prepare ourselves for more of this rapid development. They're finding ways to really get through the development cycle much faster. Instead of years, it's taking months. I think we as a supplier have to make sure we have our cold chain facilities set up, we have proper air routes identified so that we can respond quickly, not only to a pandemic, but also the explosion of biologics and cancer treatments being developed and vaccines being developed with this new mRNA technology. So that's the one thing we're preparing for now, looking at the major air routes, including air routes from Asia, India, South Korea, to make sure we can get these materials to the countries that need them quickly. And the second point, to build off what Julie said, is about home healthcare. During the clinical trials for the vaccines, we all know that clinics didn't want the patients coming in and patients didn't want to go to the clinic. And so we had to pivot to a home health clinical trial, virtual trial technique with nurses going to homes and administering drug and then collecting the blood, bringing it back to the lab. We've now perfected that process, and we need to really expand on that, because in the future, home healthcare, routine physical exams by doctors will be held at the home, and being ready for that whole shift in how healthcare is delivered is going to be changing the way we work in the future.
Thank you so much, Wes. So, even before this pandemic, we've heard about the importance of epidemic preparedness. It sounds kind of wonky, but, and the role that the private sector can play in enhancing global health security. I'd love to ask you, all of you, and Jeremy, I'm going to start with you. What role can public-private partnerships play in furthering global health security to make sure that we're better prepared in the future? I mean, if we can hopefully learn something from this, I worry that we're making some mistakes or repeating some mistakes, but I'm hoping that there's other things that we can learn because I'm sure there will be the next pandemic. And I'm just wondering, Jeremy, if you could comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think what we've seen over the last 2 years, right, is this is not a theoretical risk. It's not a wonky risk. It's not something that, I used to work in a think tank in between my stints in government, and I wrote a lot about this and was in a lot of meetings with Julie over those years, including one just as this thing was kicking off. It's not hypothetical. These things will hit. They will hit again. And you think of the literally trillions upon trillions of dollars that governments have spent, the trillions of dollars of impact on businesses' bottom lines, the huge disruption. We have a shared interest. I think everyone's interest points in the same direction here in being better prepared, and that's a matter of stronger public health systems. That's a matter of stronger early warning, which is an area I think we could do far better in. If businesses had even a month or two's warning of what was coming on COVID-19, they could have adapted a lot more than they did. And so I think that, we have a shared interest in getting this right. And I think that's going to take investments not just by government, but also by the private sector in the sort of systems that need to be built. It's going to take, I think, for lack of a better term, a sort of a political constituency for this. Businesses signaling to governments that they want to see more investment in this area, and that they have a strong and material interest in not being caught off guard. And being better protected against this sort of risk. Of all the major disruptive risks that the world faces, we're probably still, even now, among the least protected against this one in terms of the systems and the infrastructure that need to be developed.
Thank you, Jeremy. Julie, I'll go to you next.
I just hope that when we look at this pandemic and really get serious about where do we go from here, that we have a mental model that says, health security is national security and global security, and that we realize that we have to invest commensurate with the degree of threat that we're facing. I completely agree with Jeremy. This isn't a once in a lifetime or a once in a century outcome. This is a part of our future, and we need to be much better prepared for this. And I think from the standpoint of the private sector, whether we're talking about the leaders of our business organizations as employers who influence employees and how people think about preparedness, how businesses themselves become part of the solution as well as part of the response capability, but also, again, as Jeremy said, as advocates. Because the one thing that we have seen that I think is very hopeful in this space is that trust in businesses is high. And right now, trust everywhere else seems to be at a premium. And so if we can get some of our trusted thought leaders and some of our community business leaders and even our small and large employers in the non-pharmaceutical spaces, of course, the non-health spaces, I think if we kind of align on unity of purpose here, it's a powerful force. And we really can provide a enlightened self-interest perhaps, but we can mount a powerful argument to the decision makers that these investments are important long-term investments for the sake of our businesses, but more importantly for the sake of our communities and the people we care about. So I don't think we're going to get to change easily, because as we've seen time and time again following previous health crises, there is a crisis, but then it follows very quickly with complacency. Right now, we have to maintain some level of strong motivation to not let that happen this time and to sustain our awareness, but also to secure the kind of investment over the long run to progressively create the solutions we need. I was in a Zoom conference last week with my colleague, Dr. Rajiv Venkaya, who's the head of vaccines at Takeda, and he made a statement that's haunted me ever since. He said, from a scientific perspective, we have the technical capability to take pandemic threats off the table. Not today, but we're very likely to be able to do that with the state of our science. But we do not have the social will and the political will to make the kinds of investments and the changes in our level of preparedness that would be necessary to take advantage of what our science and technology can bring us. So those are really important choices that we have to make. And I think the private sector is well positioned to be a strong advocate for that evolution.
Thank you, Julie. I wonder which one of those are going to be harder to push on. Wes, I'm going to give you the last word on this one.
Well, it's not over yet. I mean, I point to Africa because we're very involved now in getting vaccines into Africa. And it's, I think, less than 5% of the population of Africa, with the exception of Ghana, is fully vaccinated. We have a long way to go there. And I think what we have to do is learn the lessons that we just learned here in the US and make better decisions about distribution. This is not a supply constraint issue. As far as I know, we've bought 1.2 billion doses for allocation. The US government, I think, should be more involved in making decisions here. Use the public-private partnership that we've developed already to let the people that are experts in logistics get a handle on how to do this and help us. I met with the African ambassadors a few months ago in Washington, and they're frustrated. I think we have an opportunity here to really take a leadership role in the world by getting more of these vaccines delivered faster into Africa in stability, and that means getting them freezers and local cold chain facilities. So we need to learn from that, and I think build on that so we can be better partners in the world to get the rest of this world back on its feet.
Yeah, and I think it's you know, that they're all waiting for the vaccines from all of the conversations we at RED have had. So I think that, you know, I'm so grateful to all of you for all of the work that you've done across all of the different private and public sectors. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, we are short on time. So I am going to wrap up. I want to give a big thanks to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation for making today's conversation possible, and to all three of our panelists, Dr. Julie, Jeremy, and Wes. Thank you all so much for participating in today's discussion, but more importantly, thank you all for the incredible work that you and all of your companies and organizations are doing. Appreciate you joining us today, and hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. From pandemic preparedness over to sustainable plastics, a stretch that maybe doesn't seem so impossible when you start to think about the amount of plastics that we used during the pandemic and how our own interest in environmental protection has heightened as a result of the pandemic. So I'm pleased to introduce today a great panel that really represents the plastic supply chain. I'd like to introduce Haley Lowry with Dow, representing a raw materials supplier, Stephanie Potter with Nestle, that represents a brand owner who's in charge of packaging design, and Brent Bell with Waste Management, who really looks at how do we manage plastics at the end of their life. So what we want to do today is really talk about the intersections of sustainable plastics, innovation, and investment. Where are we? Where are we headed? And what are the opportunities here in the US to really advance this as a competitive advantage? So I'm going to open up with a question for each one of my panelists. Haley, I'm going to start with you, which is, what would you define as sustainable plastics? And what is a collaboration that you guys are doing, or an initiative that you guys are doing that you think really reflects that?
Yeah, thank you so much. So from my side, I think, a sustainable plastic is one that is truly circular as well as has a very low carbon footprint. So at Dow, we aim to be the leading circular solutions provider at the lowest CO2 footprint. And one of the initiatives that I'm most proud of is in progression of our advanced recycling efforts. Today, the recycling system needs significant investment and innovation to be able to match supply of waste in these materials with the demands that our companies and over 400 brands have set commitments to have their products to be more recyclable, made with recycled content, and be reusable. And so at Dow, we see a significant opportunity to make new plastics from waste plastics that are truly circular. And today there's a large percentage of plastics that are not mechanically recycled through the recycling system today. And that's where technologies like advanced recycling come into play. One of the things that we talked about today in our 2021 Investor Day, we had an Investor Day that was solely focused on ESG at the New York Stock Exchange early in October. And I mentioned that we would be launching a circular plastic next year through our partnerships and our innovation that we've built. And so plastics do have one of the lowest greenhouse gas emissions compared to other material types already, but we have our eye on the future and we're working on developing even lower carbon footprint products. And we announced a new investment in the world's first zero carbon emissions plant in Canada. So for us, that's a vision that we can see. It's a vision that products can save emissions when they're being used, and when they reach the end of their useful life of the product being over, you can get those back and really keep that cycle going. So with investment, policy support, innovation, infrastructure, and desire, this is not just a pipe dream. It's really in front of us now.
Thank you, Haley. Stephanie, what's your thoughts?
I mean, I would say, from the design side, it's around designing for the system that you're moving the plastics into. From the perspective of Nestle being in 97% of U.S. households and being one of the largest food and beverage companies in the world, for us, plastics is, when we think of plastics, we think about it with respect to packaging, and everything that we do needs to come in a package, and that is inclusive of plastics and other materials as well. So for us, fit for purpose in terms of using as little as you can, but as making sure that it's preserving the integrity of the product it's intended to protect, and that has its own sustainability kind of attached to it with respect to food waste mitigation and the rest. But for us, we have pretty ambitious goals attached to our packaging portfolio and attached to plastics in particular around reducing our use of virgin plastic by 1/3 in the next 3 years, making sure that all of our plastics packaging is recyclable, using increasing amounts of recycled content. So with all of these goals, we really need to be thinking about how to not only be designing for the future that kind of our consumers are heading into with consumption patterns and the rest, but also making sure that the downstream side is equipped to handle that packaging and taking full responsibility for the life cycle of the packaging and the plastics that we're putting into the market. So to your second part of your question about kind of one product or something that we're working on, I would say from the recyclability standpoint, we're really thinking about aiming toward aiming toward industry recognized standards for circular design, and making sure that that's embedded across the brands and the plastics formats and packaging formats that we're utilizing. One example would be our Starbucks creamers. So fun fact, Starbucks is there are portions that are part of the Nestle business, and we in 2018 put out a creamer bottle that had recyclability from the perspective of the primary bottle, the kind of core piece, and then also a recycling compatible ink on the shrink film, thinking about the cap and the recyclability of that. So it's not just one piece, but it's thinking about the whole of the product and the plastics components attached to it. Another one would be from a recycled content standpoint. Purina is another brand of Nestle. Hopefully this is also a way of introducing the breadth of the brands that we have and the companies that we have in the US. But Purina has a Tidy Cats jug that uses 50% recycled content, and that alone has saved kind of 200,000 pounds of virgin plastic just in terms of the amount that we're putting into market. So we're really trying to capture not just the innovations that we're kind of designing around, but also the footprint implications of those innovations. And that's all, things that we're kind of publicly starting to talk about and really share for the good of the whole system. So I'll stop there, but there's plenty of other examples that I'm happy to talk about.
Some exciting innovations. Thank you, Stephanie. Brent, let's hear from your perspective as a waste management company. How does sustainable plastics fit into your vision?
Yeah, so thanks for having us here. On waste management's viewpoint, we're somewhat the material gatekeeper for a lot of these materials, and plastics has been the forefront of the conversations lately. While it's less than 5% of the recycling stream that we see in the average curbside container, it's north of 30 to 40% of the value of that material. And so one thing we've seen, and Nestle, Stephanie is right at the forefront of this, the brand's commitment to using recycled content helps drive that value for those recycled materials. So part of waste management's goal has been the last few years, how do we unlock more of this supply of this valuable plastic materials that's potentially going into the landfills, and how do we redirect that into the right bin in the recycling system? Some of it's education programs, but also it's access to recycling, making sure that we get larger bins out there at the curbside, making sure that we're in communities that don't have access today to give them more recycling access so that we can get more of this valuable material back into the right bin, into the recycling stream. The rough estimates on our side, if you look at the demand that's out there with some of these commitments that brands have made, it's 3 to 5 times the amount of supply we have today. So from our position, we have to absolutely do our job on the collection side and the processing side to make sure we can capture this material and get it back into the brands who are using this for recycled content.
Excellent. Interesting that demand far exceeds supply. I don't know how much we talk about that publicly. So thanks for bringing that out. All of you guys, at least representatives from your company, have been involved in some roundtables discussions that the Chamber Foundation has had looking at this intersection. And one of the things that came out of that struck me, and I'd love to hear from Haley and Brent on this one, is that innovators can come up with ideas, they can prove the validity of their technology, but to get it to scale seems to be a real challenge in terms of getting the investment that they need. Can you guys talk a little bit about what you guys are doing with innovators, or what role you're playing in terms of trying to address your own innovation challenges? Let's start with Brent.
Sure. So, every year we do have a kind of an innovations forum where we invite folks to come and participate. And we do often do quite a few investments in, what the next big idea could be for some of these ideas and concepts. So we have a special group that does those investments, and we track it. And most of the time we're a minority shareholder of that company and try to help them progress. But then we have some more further advanced, well-funded innovations like robotics, where we work with robotics companies to install those systems into our facilities. Understanding they're not going to work great day one. It's just kind of like your first cell phone. It's not going to have all the features that your cell phone today has. But we have to work with those innovations in our plants to let them have that kind of access so that we can get to the point where we need to be. And robotics is just a great example, but access to our facilities and making sure we can kind of help further their development.
So sometimes it's access. It's not just always investment then.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting here. Haley, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so we have seen a really big shift in movement in ESG funding, and I would say that is starting to totally tip the scale on investment available for many of these new innovations. At Dow, we launched our sustainability targets to stop the waste, close the loop, and protect the climate in June in 2020, and we've seen progression on each of these. And 5 years ago, we started something called the Dow Impact from our Dow Foundation. Over that time period, we allocated $5 million across 25 projects that address circularity and waste. And to get funding for many of these grants, you had to have a measurable social, environmental, and a business impact. And so that's where many of these projects got started. And that's where they were birthed out of. But as the pilots continued to progress, this is one of the big areas. As a Fortune 100 company, we need scale. And many of these startups are brilliant at speed and acceleration, but Dow and larger companies have the scale. So you have to find ways to bridge that gap. But after many of these impact fund pilots, we've seen opportunities to progress in terms of funding of equity or loans or venture capital arms of the corporation, as well as many other VC impact funding through ESG. That space is really starting to increase. So I would say the investment should not be the problem in the future. Getting to that scale, there's plenty of investment available, and it will be even more available as ESG continues to progress.
Haley, can I take a crack at it too, or are we off to?
Yeah, go for it.
Just to sort of carry out further the upstream downstream side, I think for us, one of the upstream kind of investments that we're making is actually kind of a first in the food industry. It's an R&D center out of Switzerland called the Nestle Institute for Packaging Sciences, and it's kind of our way of in-house testing refillable and reuse, kind of models, simplified packaging, plastics packaging formats, alternatives to plastic, bio-based, et cetera, and then putting those into markets pretty intentionally in terms of where we can kind of road test some of it and then tweak and carry back on. So that's one on the sort of design side that I think is pretty interesting and not as well known that Nestle has been investing in for the past 2 years or so. And then on the kind of collection side, we stood up 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. We have a private equity fund within the Closed Loop Partners Group, and that's called the Closed Loop Leadership Fund. And that is all about trying to shore up the infrastructure and help kind of modernize and flow funds through to promote some of that modernization and that optimization that needs to happen. So we have a portfolio of companies that have been seeded through that fund, and we'll continue to look at opportunities to do that. But really, the idea there is to the supply and demand comments that Brent was making, figuring out ways to increase the flow of feedstock that we can then reuse in packaging going forward. So those are two in terms of just kind of putting funds into the market and trying to make them work for the sustainability goals that I mentioned earlier.
Thank you. No, that's interesting. You guys have all mentioned in each one of your examples, kind of going after a bigger picture and collaborating with other people in order to get after that. That was one of the pieces of feedback that we had within the roundtables, was this need for breaking down silos so that, it's not plastics packaging, it's maybe plastics in general. And how can textiles and automotives and packaging all work together, as well as, how do we even think bigger and broader? Is there a role for, say, zoos and restaurants that are serving fast food cups and utensils and things like that would have single-use plastics? Is there a way for us to all collaborate? And so I'm wondering if you guys can give examples that you haven't already shared about where those collaborations are really happening to break down those silos and go for that bigger picture. Let's start with Stephanie.
Sure. I think there's a couple of cuts. One would be maybe intra-industry, right? Where kind of competitors in the marketplace for Nestle, we are kind of starting to realize that some of these goals that we've stood up pertaining to sustainable plastics are really not sort of one company's problem to solve. And actually one company probably can't solve it, no matter how much you're putting into the design side or the investment side or whatnot. So we actually have stood up what we call the Sustainable Food Policy Alliance. And it's comprised of Nestle, Danone, Mars, and Unilever. And what's unique about it, I think, is that it's very much sort of self-run, right? So we're working on kind of the priorities, and we're working on how to move those through and how to execute these, and what other partners we need to pull in to get that done. But we have kind of shared issues when it comes to solving some of the things that our employees and consumers and supply chain and customers need. And so we're looking at aligning around specific climate principles, recycling and infrastructure principles, and plastic waste reduction kind of principles to make sure that we're unified in how we are going about solving these challenges, and that we're doing so kind of in a larger, hopefully a larger voice. So that's, I think, one that's kind of an interesting, competitor recognition that some of these things are pre-competitive and need to be solved together. So that's a really fun group to be a part of. The one that I think, the second one, which is more cross-industry and public-private, would be, I think that the U.S. Plastics Pact, which just started a little while ago, is starting to really get some legs under it in terms of, it's one of many pacts all over the world, so that helps kind of beating the drum in various markets and customizing the solutions toward the market that the pact is operating in. But I think for the U.S., which is the one I sit in, it's good because it's helping us align around some industry accepted standards for on the design side and on the sort of standard side, and just making sure that we're kind of rowing in the same direction and bringing increasing numbers of players who have some input into whichever side of the plastics conversation under the same tent to be talking together. The other thing I think that's helpful about it is on the brand side and on the industry side, it's helping us figure out what we're aiming toward in terms of really aggregating some of that data about the plastics we're putting into the market, so that we know what the size of the pie is that we need to be addressing. So I'm interested in continuing to be part of that conversation and see where that goes in the next couple of years, as there are sort of specific 2025 targets attached to some of that work.
Certainly compelling reason, yeah, for competitors to kind of collaborate. Brent, do you have any examples that you guys wanted to share from waste management perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, it's kind of the whole circularity starts at what gets put on the shelves from packaging design. Are these packages easy to recycle for a consumer in their curbside program, right? That's usually the first step. And then how can we play a part in that and making sure our technology can keep up with it and can process, separate to the highest value. But all the collaboration starts with what comes in, what comes on the shelves, and making sure that it's the education programs for consumers. It seems like plastics is at the top of the list for the most confusing item. They all have numbers on the bottom, right? And there's these rotating arrows on everything, but yet some stuff goes in the bin, some stuff can't go in the bin. So just making that a simple education message, and then also making the packages on the shelves easy to recycle.
I'm going to change focus a little bit, just looking at where we are in terms of time. I'm going to start with Brent in terms of infrastructure. There's a lot of discussion right now about our recycling systems being behind the times, but we're also hearing from innovators that, investment to scale investments on, like, it's easier to get investment for software or, quick, easy, fast return investments as opposed to heavy infrastructure like building a new plant or a new facility. And so just wondering if you've got any thoughts around, funding for infrastructure here in the US. What do we need to do? What's missing?
Yeah, so earlier this week, we did make a public announcement for America Recycles Day on, we've invested $700 million by the end of 2022 over the last 2 years on, new recycling infrastructure. That includes, automating most of our facilities to expanding capacity and even entering, some new markets that may not have, full recycling access today. So all that investment is geared towards, unlocking more of the supply of material, how we can get it out of the landfill into, the proper recycling containers. That's, includes multifamily, commercial, and then our existing customer base as well. But we definitely look at the EPA's goal of 50% recycled diversion by 2030, and we see the demand that customers are having and the brands are making commitments on, and this ESG movement is as Haley has mentioned, it's here to stay, right? Whether that's in executive compensation, this has changed over the last decade where people are taking this seriously, and we're seeing that. And so we absolutely want to make sure we can provide the infrastructure and put that in place to handle this. And so, we're doing our part, but there's still a long way to go.
Thanks, Brent. Haley, any thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, this is an incredibly important area. We did some work with the Recycling Partnership, and they actually outlined a report that showed it would take about $17 billion of investment over the next 5 years to totally transform the residential recycling system. So all of the investments that Brent just talked about is a really great first start. And I think we have to continue to make the system accessible to all ambiguous so that everyone can recycle across the entire US, and that will help us match the supply and demand. One of the examples that we've invested in has been the Closed Loop Circular Plastics Fund in North America that we recently helped launch, and that is to put investments into scalable recycling technologies, equipment upgrades, and infrastructure solutions. That's initially a $25 million investment, but we're working to grow that catalytically to over 100 million. And so these types of initiatives and investments are going to continue to be really critical, as well as, I may mention policy that we feel like is going to be absolutely required to totally get the system to where supply and demand match. And those are policy systems like EPR, where it really helps funnel the investments gained from or the money gained from the EPR system back into fix the infrastructure investments that need to happen. So I believe that there's a lot of opportunity here, and I'm very pro recycling and feel like we have a good pathway to fix the gaps of matching the supply and demand.
Thank you, Haley. Stephanie, what's Nestle's thoughts?
Yeah, just to further carry the point that Haley's making. One, I think we both mentioned kind of closed loop and some of our various investments around plastics and infrastructure. I actually see that as a really good thing. I don't see that as sort of, I think it's really helpful to direct funds to being able to sort of address some of this in different ways depending on the input. So I really like that we're starting to see some real kind of expertise come out of the US in terms of where funding should flow and how we should be thinking about private sector dollars. So that's just a quick comment on having kind of two different streams going with closed loop between the two of us, which is great. And then on the producer response, on the EPR side, which Haley mentioned, so Nestle globally is very, very supportive of these, what we call extended producer responsibility programs. We participate in them for consumer packaging all over the world. But basically what it is it's saying that, you're attaching a fee for packaging that's being put out into the market. And that fee can be ideally, right, if designed in a certain way, it can be changed or it can be lowered if you have kind of better environmental performance and if certain kind of recycling targets are met. So what it does is it allows, it both brings the responsibility for that full life cycle management of plastics and packaging to the brand owners that are putting it into the market, but it's also incentivizing design for better performance by impacting kind of how much you're paying based on how your plastics moves or how your packaging moves. It's not specifically to plastics per se, but it's a really, I think, good legislative lever to be able to sort of drive some of those dollars to where it's most needed on the infrastructure side and on the education side too, to help consumers understand how to recycle in a way that keeps contamination out so that it allows for, better kind of recovery of some of that feedstock. So that's one that, we among others on the industry side are really, really supportive of. We've just seen it pass in 2 states for the first time in the US this year. And so I think we expect there to be a lot of energy around it next year. But the good news is that we've got a lot of experience on this from the 40 or so other countries that have already had this type of program in place. So I think that's the real opportunity when it comes to an infusion of capital into infrastructure in the coming couple of years. Is that. So.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to close off with one question for you guys, which is, what can our audience do to really help advance the concept of sustainable plastics? Is there something we can do as individuals, or is it really all up to the corporations to solve? Let's start with Haley.
No, I think we all have a role to play in this. And, I guess I have 2 thoughts. Is one, take some extra steps to help plastic that isn't currently curbside collected today, but it can be put into store drop-off locations. Take some of those extra steps. I know it's not super convenient for households, and it requires a little extra work to get this material back to the retailer, but we're trying to work on developing better systems as an entire industry. So let's not ignore what's working today. And just to give you an example, recently we partnered with Meijer, who's a retailer in the Midwest, to take their store drop-off material that they collected through their in-store recycling program back into technology that would pave their parking lots. And this recycled polymer modified asphalt parking lots was utilizing Dow's Elvaloy technology and it used 12,000 pounds of post-consumer recycled material, which was equivalent to 944,000 plastic bags. So even just participating in some of those programs that are available that helps keep some of the contamination out of the bins today that cannot be recycled today in your curbside collection, but it can be in the store drop-off program. So like dry cleaning bags and films and bread bags, and some work that we've done with Kellogg with their bare naked granola pouches, things that have hard to recycle label on it. That is actually really valuable material, and it can be used for many applications like roads today, or maybe in the future, more packaging applications. So you can participate. And then the last thing that I would say is, you also have the power to drive purchasing decisions with the way that you buy your products. So buy products that are recyclable, buy products that are made with recycled content or have lower carbon solutions. A few of these things that we've been working on are recyclable toothpaste tubes, bio-based Crocs that are made from a bio-based renewable plastic. So every day, products are evolving to become more sustainable forms of those materials, so you can vote with your wallet.
Thank you, Haley. Important message right there. Brent, do you have any thoughts from a waste management perspective?
Yeah, I mean, Haley's exactly right. We always say there's 2 steps to recycling. There's putting the right items in your recycling bin, and then there's supporting and buying products that are made from recycled content or packages that use recycled content. That's just as important, the demand side of this. And so, we absolutely agree with her on, you can use that as your purchasing power, make sure your brands know that that's important to you. They're using recycled content in their packaging. And it goes all the way up to, corporations. We use all of our carts now are made from, recycled plastics, a percentage of that. Our frontline uniforms are made from recycled content. And then, as we talk to the federal government and other customers, buy materials that are made out of recycled content. That helps out with this whole circularity. And so the demand side is very important.
Excellent. Thank you. Stephanie, as the consumer-facing business here, what's your advice for consumers?
I think consumers are the most important. Speaking on behalf of Nestle, that is true north for us as a consumer packaged goods company. I will just say, to Haley's point, vote yes, of course, support by making that kind of purchasing decision, but also support by not giving up on the system. I think maybe that's a nod to Brent's lane a little bit is, don't lose faith in our ability to solve these challenges that we've all seen more visibly coming out of COVID. And I know that's been probably previous conversations had out of the Chamber Foundation, as it's been a big deal, is just the more visible kind of, consumption habits that we have and what that looks like and where it goes. But really kind of continuing to be, intentional with kind of learning how to recycle, learning where things are, how to put things in the bin in a way that doesn't gum up the system, not wish cycling, all these things. I think that's, and we're part of that. We're part of that with our consumers, is really helping to do that education and making it easy. But not to give up is one thing I'd say. And yes, of course, continue to support those companies that are really trying to put more sustainable plastics into the market. That would be great. And then I think going kind of back upstream a little bit, I would say we've really enjoyed a lot of the collaborations that we've had with our retail partners who are really asking for this from their suppliers. I think there's a real platform for retailers, especially those that have a large footprint and a big voice, to be really partnering with the brands that they have on their shelves to try to get at this together. Same with, hotels and restaurants and other groups too. I mean, I think there's a real opportunity to partner on some of these sustainability goals that increasingly more and more of us have, not just the brands, but others across the industry. And then I guess finally, I'd say on the brand owner, the producer side, really kind of trying to all row in the same direction with respect to incorporating some of these circular design principles and put more of that into the market and be really clear and communicative that that's happening, so that we start to really kind of beat the drum for the importance of it. And it doesn't feel so much like one of us is on an island, but we're really all kind of just designing for the system that we want to have and designing for the future that we want to be in. So that's what I'd say.
Awesome. And on that note, I want to thank all of you guys. I think it was rather inspiring to hear the stories of collaboration and how you guys are all working together to try and advance the idea of sustainable plastics and the value of plastics. So thank you very much to Brent, to Haley, to Stephanie, and enjoy your afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mike Miller, Senior Vice President of Environmental Health and Safety and Sustainability for Advance Auto Parts. Our team at Advance was thrilled to be named the winner of last year's annual Citizens Award in the category of sustainability. At Advance, we serve our customers by helping to ensure their vehicles are in good working condition. We also serve our customers by considering the environment and societal needs in everything we do. Companies around the world share this commitment to leaving the world in a better place for future generations. And the 5 finalists in this year's sustainability category are outstanding examples. From developing sustainable supply chains to eliminating fossil fuels, to delivering on the concept of circularity and improving the lives of billions of people around the world by committing to the UN Sustainability Development Goals. Each of these finalists is doing its part to being socially responsible and protect our use of the planet's resources. I was humbled to be asked to join the selection committee for this year's Sustainability Award, and I know you'll be as impressed as I was when you see the progress each of these finalists is making. Let's start the video, please.
The finalists for the 2021 Best Sustainability Program Award are ADM. For 2 decades, ADM has worked with India's Ministry of Agriculture to develop a sustainable supply chain that allows smallholder soy farmers to scale production and achieve organic and non-GMO certification. As a result, 250,000 smallholders in India are now registered vendors with ADM. The program has advanced both the well-being of people and the health of the planet, as well as improved economic conditions for growers and their communities. Biogen. As a pioneer in neuroscience, Biogen cares deeply about human health and the link between climate, health, and equity. Biogen's Healthy Climate, Healthy Lives is a $250 million, 20-year commitment to go fossil fuel-free, engage employees and suppliers around shared climate goals, and advance the science and action on climate, health, and equity. Microsoft Corporation. Microsoft is working to become carbon negative, zero waste, and water positive by 2030. Microsoft Cloud Supply Chain is utilizing the power of data science, artificial intelligence, and digital technology with 3 supply chain-focused areas: circular cloud, circular design, and circular supply chain to achieve circularity at scale with a zero-waste plan for every part. Since January 2020, the company has reduced carbon emissions by 6%, or roughly 730,000 metric tons. Philips. Philips is committed to making the world healthier, more sustainable, and improving the lives of 2 billion people per year by 2025. In 2016, the company launched a 5-year sustainability program titled Healthy People, Sustainable Planet. The program allowed Philips to hit carbon neutrality in its operations, 100% electricity from renewable sources, over 70% of sales from green products and services, 15% of sales coming from circular revenues, recycling 90% of its operational waste, and sending zero waste to landfill.
Wow, what an amazing set of companies doing such impactful work in sustainability. Hi everyone, I'm Peter Fadul and I lead the Sustainability and Circular Economy portfolio here at the U.S. Chamber Foundation. It's my pleasure to announce the winner of the Best Sustainability Program at today's Citizens Awards. Firstly, I want to congratulate all of the companies represented here today for the impact they're making on a daily basis and for their achievement as finalists in the Citizens Awards. Our building towards a more sustainable future wouldn't be possible without their leadership, and we're thrilled to honor them here today. Now, without further ado, here comes the winner. And our winner is Biogen. Our sincere congratulations from the entire foundation team. Now let's hear from their team.
Thank you, Peter. On behalf of Biogen, I would like to express our gratitude to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation for this award. We are, of course, honored by the recognition for our Healthy Climate, Healthy Lives initiative, and are equally inspired by the incredible work of our fellow finalists, as I just got a chance to view some of that through the videos in this category this year. So congratulations to all, quite frankly. When we announced our commitment last year to eliminate fossil fuel emissions from our operations by 2040, you can imagine that was considered a significant challenge ahead. As the responsible leader for Biogen's manufacturing network and responsible for our operations and manufacturing facilities across the globe, fossil fuel emissions is not only a critical, important endeavor for us, but outlines a host of challenges and opportunities as we work towards that over the years ahead. And of course, it is deeply rooted in science, which is our critical action ahead of us to act. I think many folks know the various statistics that have been published, but to name one, the World Bank estimates that climate change will push an additional 100 million people into poverty by 2030. We also know that fossil fuel emissions cost us years in life expectancy, and most vulnerable are the communities that face exposure to air pollution, which is, certainly, I think, something that each of us wants to combat aggressively. So it's impossible to separate the interconnectivity issues of climate, health, and equity, which is why we've done this collapsed approach across all three angles. We are also proud, and I want to take the opportunity to reference the collaborations because we're not doing it alone. It obviously, our peers are equally invested in this, and we're heavily invested in the community through various partnerships. We're grateful for the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, where we are advancing research to better understand the link between air pollution and brain health. And of course, brain health being at the core mission at Biogen. I also want to thank the teams at AmeriCares, with whom we launched a program to address the climate risks in under-resourced community health clinics. And we are equally grateful for our colleagues at MIT, where we are collaborating to develop the world's first model of climate and health to help guide policymaking, which of course is equally critical to the future. And of course, we certainly could not have made progress without the innovative and pioneering spirit of each and every Biogen employee, their dedication, their passion, the ideas that they bring to the table to support our healthy climate, healthy lives helps us make all of this possible. So I thank all of the employees, all of my peers, all of the other participants as part of this award. And I very much, on behalf of Biogen, thank you for this meaningful recognition.
Hello from Austin, Texas. I am so excited that our city is joining forces with the U.S. Chamber Foundation as one of the next Beyond 34 cities. It's one of my priorities as mayor to take real aggressive action on climate change, perhaps the defining issue of our time. And that includes keeping Austin on the leading edge of the zero waste and circularity movement. Every item we bring into our city and consume has an impact on our climate, from how it was produced to how it was transported and ultimately where it ends up. All too often, these items end up in our natural environment, green spaces, or filling up our landfills instead of being recycled or reused so that they can be put to productive use in our economy. We know our ambitious goals for a circular economy here in Austin can't be reached alone. We need the support of our nonprofit partners, businesses who share our values, and other cities who can pass along their own wisdom. We're all ears and we want to learn. That's why we jumped at the chance to be a part of the U.S. Chamber Foundation's exciting work in the Beyond 34 initiative. We've already made great progress on circularity in Austin by setting a goal of reaching 90% diversion from our landfill by 2040. Joining the U.S. Plastics Pact, offering compost collection to all city customers, pioneering circular entrepreneurship programming like the reverse pitch competition, and more. I know that this project will take the efforts to the next level by engaging corporate leaders and connecting us to other visionary cities. Thank you to the U.S. Chamber Foundation for your support of Austin's journey towards circularity. And I welcome the partnership of anyone in the audience as Austin works toward our zero waste and climate neutral future. Enjoy the panel.
What a great way to start. I want to start by really thanking Mayor Adler by painting a picture of what Beyond 34 is about and the partnership that we're going to talk about, where cities work together and learn alongside the U.S. Chamber Foundation about how to build a circular future. Welcome to the panel. We're really glad you've joined us. I am Julie Gerke. I'm the Vice President of Philanthropy for Walmart and the Walmart Foundation, and I am really pleased to be here. We are a proud supporter of Beyond 34, which was started by the Chamber Foundation in 2016, really with a vision of building scalable solutions that can be locally tailored for building a circular economy, and how we can accelerate that work by cities learning from each other, engaging the business community, and really moving as quickly as possible to a circular future. I am excited because we have cities that have already been on their way: Orlando, Florida, Cincinnati, Ohio, and then we have two of our newest city partners joining us and represented today in Austin, Texas, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Today's panelist, I am going to introduce here, which we're going to start with Gina McKinley, who is the Manager of Strategic Initiatives Division at the City of Austin, working with Mayor Adler to really make this real. And Emily Yates, Director of the Smart Cities Program at the City of Philadelphia. Thank you both for being here. I'm excited to learn about what you all have underway. I'm also joined by a fellow supporter of the initiative, John Kalarchek, sorry about that, who's Senior Director of CSR and Waste Reduction at Walgreen Boots Alliance. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited about what I'm going to learn from you all and what you're going to share with us along the way. So to get us started, I think it's important that we learn a little bit about the starting place you're all at. So starting with Gina and then moving to Emily and John, having you wrap us up, can you briefly highlight some of the key actions that your city or company has already started to transition to a circular economy? So Gina, over to you.
Thanks, and I'm happy to be here with the panel today. And I thank you to the foundation for working with Austin. You got a little bit of context from Mayor Adler about some of the things that are happening in Austin, but to set the stage, in 2011, like the mayor said, we did establish our zero waste goal, which is to achieve 90% diversion by the year 2040. Currently, that's been in place for about a decade now. So currently we are taking a look at that plan and doing an update to the plan. So the timing with Beyond 34 was great. We are looking at the plan to make sure the strategies will let us achieve that target by the year 2040, aligning it with our new circularity initiatives that are in our city, as well as our climate equity goals. A couple of examples I'll throw out. We're looking internally at the city organization as a whole. We have a little over 13,000 employees in our city across many buildings and departments, and we have a circular cities pilot where we are looking at our internal practices to make sure we're really practicing what we preach and creating circular practices within the business of our city. We also, like I think he mentioned, joined with the Plastics Pact in 2020 as an activator. So we're looking at specific commodities as well, like plastics, and working with the pact to identify what our national strategy might be around that specific commodity. So those are a couple of examples of things that we're doing in our city, but really happy to be involved going on.
Definitely happy to share, and really echoing Gina's excitement. We're thrilled that the U.S. Chamber Foundation has selected Philadelphia as a city to be part of the Beyond 34 program. So in Philadelphia, I lead the Smart Cities work, which is essentially looking at innovative tech and data and ways to help improve government efficiencies and improve quality of life. So for me, it's really exciting to have circularity situated and housed within that program because the technology will help enable the transition. And some of the programs we've launched already have planted seeds of circularity. So we had a challenge issued to help us achieve our zero waste by 2035 target. And we ended up developing an urban mining tool looking at construction and demolition waste and where it's being created and also where it could be used. So trying to identify where we could create hubs for those valuable resources. We're also partnering with a company called Retriever, which very serendipitously started at the beginning of COVID when everybody was going through their house and cleaning out their closets. Retriever collects in a contactless way textiles and e-waste and then works with companies to upcycle them and maintain their high value. And then we're also partnering with them to get computers to families in need. So they're also collecting computers that we have refurbishers refurbish and provide to address our digital divide work. And we have a food program where we're looking at city procured food and ways that we can create a more circular ecosystem around $25 million worth of procured food, knowing that the market can really impact a transition in that space. So yeah, we have a lot of really great projects happening in Philadelphia.
Thanks, Emily. So John, you've heard a little bit about what a couple of cities have going on, but could you talk a little bit about what Walgreens Boots Alliance has underway?
So certainly a little different perspective coming from the corporate side on things, but I think this opens up, lots of opportunity for us. So our journey really on the waste side of things got started with us obviously looking at hazardous waste and some of the things we have to do due to regulations, but then it really morphed into more of what about the things that aren't necessarily required by regulation everywhere. So we started our zero waste to landfill journey in our distribution centers maybe about 4 years ago, where we're running at about a 94% diversion rate in our distribution centers. Our corporate campus has recently implemented all of their programs to officially be zero waste to landfill, and that's just started. So I'm looking forward to starting to see some data come out of that. And certainly, the circularity piece is a piece that continues to evolve. And I think we heard from the previous group that spoke, and I know we're going to get into it a little bit today, is really, working with these different communities, you get down to the infrastructure piece and what's possible and who do you work with and how do you do these kinds of things. And I think that's the beauty of Beyond 34, because you have your usual suspects that we talk to all the time and we do a lot of work with, but being able to spend time in the community and work with folks in the local community opens up all kinds of opportunities for us that you don't necessarily really think about. You never really know where that new innovative answer may come from. And I think the opportunity that we get to work with others and try to just do the things we do every day, which is in my area especially, I deal with the very real piece. It's a tangible something that we have and I have to deal with it. We have a whole other group upstream that work on things for us to I always tell them their job is to put me out of business. So, we certainly work and collaborate with them internally. But my area really gets involved in that tangible piece of we have it now and we have to do something with it because we can't sell it, we can't donate it. So I know we're going to get into that a little bit, but those are some of the main things that my group's been working on. And I'll kick it back over to you.
Thanks, John. I think that sets up really my question for Gina and Emily, which is, you've got a lot going on already. We're hearing, Austin and Philadelphia have really been involved in moving to a circular economy for a while. What is it that you hope to accomplish through the Beyond 34 partnership? Are there specific partnerships or innovations, challenges that you're excited to tackle in this initiative specifically? And Emily, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I don't think there's a specific waste problem that I'm looking to tackle. Probably not the ideal response to this question, but honestly, the big part for me is the opportunities to create jobs and the scale of jobs. So looking for jobs for returning citizens, hard to employ, underskilled. Those kind of jobs are really valuable within the circularity space. So that's a big driver for me, but also creating the opportunity for innovation and economic and through that addressing the waste. I think the other big thing for us is we have a ton of resources in Philadelphia. And so the ability to really tap into those organizations and the universities that we have to really drive this innovative thought. We have the waste, we have the illegal dumping, we have we just had a massive tire fire a week ago that was really horrible, and the smoke went all the way to South New Jersey. So we have the waste. Just we want people to be innovative and come up with really creative ways to use them and maintain their highest value for as long as possible. So yeah, I think it's less about the waste and more about the opportunities that we can create through that waste.
That's great. Thank you. Gina, I'd love to hear a little more about your plans in Austin.
Yeah, and following up with Emily, I mean, part of the excitement for me is really being able to learn so closely with another city. So I think going through this process with the city of Philadelphia, where we have, it sounds like both of our cities have made some progress and have some great things in place. Let's just even list on this call. I think the opportunity is there to share ideas, maybe things we've already done, and things we could do together, even potentially. But for Austin, I'd say expanding our strategic plan for circularity as a community. We've had a program that's been growing over the years, but within our community, just to give some perspective, in the city of Austin, the city utility, the solid waste utility, really only directly manages about 15% of the material that is generated in the community. And that's material that we're collecting at the curb from primarily single family homes. That leaves about 85% of that community that we don't directly influence. It's managed by the private sector. So we have to look at policies and programs to really influence where that material is flowing. And I think Beyond 34 is another opportunity for us to pull the entire community together, to have those conversations, to look at areas that we maybe haven't tapped, opportunities to kind of standardize circular business practices throughout the community. Our program is a partnership between the solid waste utility and our economic development department. So obviously clearly focused on job growth as well, and social entrepreneurship within our community, and just expanding all of those things. So I think, yeah, the opportunity potential is great, having new conversations and see what comes out of it. The opportunity to go in not knowing specifically what the solutions are going to be or the opportunities is part of the excitement for me.
That's great. So John, Walgreens Boots Alliance has made an investment in Beyond 34. So could you talk a little bit about how you see this as part of your strategy and goal around building circular economy?
Sure. So at Walgreens, everything's about the community, right? We're in communities all over the country. Our 4 pillars of the CSR strategy that we have around healthy communities, healthy planet, sustainable marketplace, healthy and inclusive workplace, they all come together in some way, shape, or form around sustainability, circular economy, waste reduction. I could argue that it could fit in any of those places because it directly impacts something in each of those 4 phases. So for us, it's something that touches the community in a very real way. Solutions that I can think about sitting just outside of Chicago always sound like great ideas when we come up with them. But when you go to the community, sometimes they make a lot of sense. Sometimes they don't make as much sense. I think that direct community involvement, dealing with the people that, live in those communities, that, our customers, the people that work for us, the community is the center of what we do, and being able to talk with people that are on the ground there and trying to figure out, where does their city want to go? What do the residents think about climate change, and about the idea of waste reduction, and about diverting things from landfill. All those things are really, really important. And sitting in Chicago, like I said, it's one thing to come up with ideas, but really working with the people that not only do the work every day in our stores, but working with other industries. Innovation is the key word that I keep hearing. And really, you don't know where that's going to come from. So it's going to be different in different places. The idea that we can take the things that we're trying to do and be a better corporate citizen, and sit down with the communities that we serve, and really, roll up our sleeves and say, what are things that can be done, and maybe even think of some things that maybe the first time we talk about it, we don't think can be done, that eventually you start peeling away, and then you find a way to get some things accomplished. So I think for us, the idea of working with the people in the communities that we serve is the utmost importance in trying to solve some of these things. Because I say all the time, we didn't create all the problems we're dealing with on our own, and we're not going to solve them on our own. So that piece of collaboration is key to us, and the people that live there are the best people to collaborate with.
No, it's a great point. Partnerships are so key, whether you're talking about the community or I heard in the last panel talking about working with suppliers. Even as recently as this morning, Walmart had a sustainable packaging summit with suppliers, thinking about how we can work together on this. at Walmart, we're thinking about circular economy as moving really from this like take, make, dispose model to being regenerative and circular in both energy and waste. Limiting our reliance on certain plastics is a huge part of that. We have two goals, global goals really by 2025 that are specific to this. So first is a 15% absolute reduction in global virgin plastic footprint. And then thinking about how we achieve 100% recyclable, reusable, or industrial compostable private brand packaging. So working in our own supply chain upstream, but then to your point, thinking through to the community. With Walmart's, 90% of Americans live within 10 miles of a Walmart. So that community partnership is real. And if we aren't working with communities really to think about how it's recycled and the infrastructure in place in communities around the country, it won't work. And then frankly, with the customer about the behavior change. And so how are we making it easy, whether it's in innovating on plastic bags or labeling to make choices for consumers who want to really help build a circular economy easy. And thinking throughout that life cycle feels really important to this work. So I'd love to have you all talk both from the city and the corporate perspective about the role of these partnerships. We're talking about public-private partnerships. We're talking about partnerships often with competitors or, really often structured in ways that might not have happened before. So, John, why don't we start with you and then come to the cities to talk about the role of private partners, public partnerships. And I'd love tangible examples if people can provide them.
Yes. So in my area, there are no competitors, right? This is a problem that we're all tackling together, and it's the only way we're going to solve them. So I've taken the word competitor out of the vocabulary in my space and really put in collaborator, an innovator, and willing participants. Some maybe not as willing, but we drag them along with us anyway, to just try to figure out, how do you deal with these types of issues? And, that infrastructure piece and everything that's happened with China Sword, and I'm sure we've been over it many, many times, has made things very complicated in this space. And I think in the previous panel, I heard him talking about infrastructure and the crumbling infrastructure, and, we're being stuck at 34%, recycling rates. All that stuff just continues to be the problem that everybody talks about. And I go to a lot of different meetings and I see most of the same people at these meetings, and we're talking about these things. I think Beyond 34 and being in the community and working with cities gives us a chance to go away from just talking about these things to really trying things. And I'm very much a roll up your sleeves and try things and do pilots and, see what works, because it's one thing for our customers to tell us what they think about plastics, like, plastic's bad. That's typically what you hear. But what happens in the real world when they're faced with a decision between, do I take a plastic water bottle? What if we put water in a glass bottle? What if we put it in an aluminum, can? What actually happens when they are there to make their decision? Do they understand the difference? Do they understand how it all impacts them and impacts their community and impacts the planet? And sometimes I say yes. And sometimes I say, no, I don't think they really understand. And it's easy to just stand up and say plastic's bad. And I know we're focusing a little on plastics now, but that's the flavor of the day, particularly in my world, right? So, I think that you have to listen to the customer. You have to find people that are looking at the world the same way you are, or you're never going to solve these kinds of problems. So we work with waste brokers. So we have two main waste brokers that we work with in the stores. We have a few more in our distribution centers, and they also work with a lot of different companies throughout the country to try to figure out where do we go in this space. I saw Waste Management on the previous panel. Certainly we work with them. We work with some smaller waste companies. We work with a lot of different people. So I could probably come up with 50 different examples, and we could talk for another hour on the different things that we've accomplished. But I'm more toward okay, now that we've accomplished some things, what's the next thing? And I think that's that's the beauty of Beyond 34, because there is something next, and there is something that, an Austin or a Philadelphia can offer us that maybe we didn't realize in some of the other cities that we've worked in. So, I think that's the beauty of, continuing to build on it and finding new and exciting people to work with and areas to work with and getting into some of those communities.
Thanks, John. Gina, I want to come to you and hear a little bit about partnerships you might want to highlight.
Sure. And I think partnerships are critical. I mean, I think we're all going to say that we can't do this work unless we're all working together. You guys mentioned making sure that you're working in the communities that your business, the Walmarts and the Walgreens are affixed in. It's really important for us too, to look to you guys because you're in the community too. And what we do as cities does have an impact on you also. I think we have to work together. I can highlight one example from Austin. So in developing policy, I talked about the 15 versus 85% and how do we influence material flow in that 85%. And one of our existing policies is called the Universal Recycling Ordinance. And that is a policy that requires a minimum level of diversion for commercial and multifamily properties. So that, runs the gamut from a small food truck to a large hospital, grocery store, et cetera. And so there's a lot to that. And the types of materials coming out of those facilities, the amount, there's a lot of variability. So we took months, really years, having conversations with folks that are impacted by potential requirements that we might impose in terms of reaching our zero waste goal. So that was looking at the people hauling the material, the businesses, the haulers, the processors, the folks who are running the businesses, tenants, property owners, bringing them all to the table to have conversations about what practical solutions might look like in our community. John mentioned a lot of the things that we did. So looking at pilot projects, we worked with business. We're Texas. We have a lot of barbecue in Austin. Working with a local barbecue business to say, can you try out composting for 6 months and then report back? Tell us how it worked for you. What do we need to do differently? So that when we ultimately establish this policy to really move material out of the landfills into a better purpose for the good of the community, we were developing practical policy requirements that ultimately made it successful. And if we had not spent that time to really build those relationships, build those partnership with the larger community, everybody involved, from whoever it's impacting directly, meaning the trash or the recycling that you're taking out every day versus you're processing the material and hauling it, it would not have, in my opinion, it would not have been successful. So that's a process that we like to replicate when we're looking at any new initiative, any new policy. So that's one example of how that has worked in our community.
That's great, Gina, and a good example of kind of a multifaceted partnership at an ecosystem level. Emily, I'd love to hear about an example you have going on in the city of Philadelphia.
Yeah, well, first I want to say, John, thank you for giving me that line about there are no competitors, only collaborators. I'm going to totally, because I agree with it and I haven't worded it so well. So thank you. I think, partnerships are critical because it goes beyond the city's ability to sustain. A lot of people think that cities are these bottomless buckets of money and capacity to just do anything that the city needs. And it's so far from the truth. In Philadelphia, 25% of our population lives at or below federal poverty level. So a lot of our work is going to focus on those individuals and trying to give them opportunities and improve their quality of living. So for us, it's going to be very much a community engagement strategy of how do we ensure that as we are deploying these pilots and these ideas and these policies that we're not further widening that the gap, but really working to close it and provide opportunity and improve their quality of life. So for us, that's going to be a huge way that we tap into partnerships, both with companies like Walmart and Walgreens, but also our universities to really get out there. Our faith-based communities, often a really great resource for doing these kind of projects. And the city itself has to realize what our role can be, which is developing the policy or adjusting the policy to help support these initiatives coming out. How can we further enable? Is it using our public space to deploy reusable collection containers or whatnot, but also our procurement mechanism. I think that's often overlooked, but such a huge opportunity for the city to really impact the market in terms of product and kind of help shift to where it's not a huge cost or a burden on our community to be more circular. And an example, not a procurement of where we've adjusted the policy, is we had a local takeout company here called Tiffin. They wanted on their own initiative to use reusable containers, which is great because we have more styrofoam than we know what to do with in the city. And they were doing it, and then all of a sudden the Department of Health knocked on their door and said, wait, hold up, you guys can't do this, because our process itself had been very bifurcated. So Department of Health wasn't communicating with our licensing and LNI, and LNI issued the permit. Department of Health had no clue. And so we worked with the Department of Health and Tiffin as the city, and we adjusted the policy so it's much easier now for corporations to come and get the permit to use reusables. And so by making that process more smooth and simple, I hope we open the door to other companies really starting to transition to more reusable containers.
That's a
Really,
great.
if I could just add a little
Yeah,
something to what Emily was saying, I think that we're really onto something with the collection piece. And I heard somebody earlier say, try to make it easy. I think all that stuff's really important. But I think the next thing that we really need to crack is the logistics piece of it, right? So we collect it in all these different places. How do we get it aggregated in a place and in a way that the recyclers want it, and that people that can use those materials for the things that they produce? That's the piece that I think is continuing to confound us just a bit. I think it's probably worse now than it was maybe 2 years ago at this time, just because of some of the supply chain issues and the cost of moving things around and the cost of fuel and things like that. So it feels like it's getting a little more difficult instead of easier. But I think there's that next piece of it is, how do we collaborate together to say, we've all got little bits and pieces of this stuff. How do we get it to an aggregation point where we can really get it into the recyclers' hands in a way and in the quantities that they want?
That's great. And thanks for that. I'm going to do a lightning round on the next question. So, this is just like one tip. So if you were kind of sitting in the shoes of an audience member wanting to get started, what is one tip that you'd have for a city or a brand looking to get started? And John, I'm going to start with you since you just jumped in, and we'll go to Jenna and then Emily.
Sure. I think my tip would be, don't close your eyes to opportunities. I think that, again, we hyper focus on the people that we work with all the time, but sometimes the answer is in a place where you would never really think about looking, I guess. So getting involved in community projects like Beyond 34, I think, is a great way to bring, retail, and you're bringing in, Marriott hotels, and you're bringing all these different people that maybe don't work together on a daily basis, but when you bring them together, they can find innovative ways of dealing with hard to deal with stuff.
That's a great point. Gina, over to you.
I'd say, I always say data. Start with your data. What's being generated, how much, by who, where's it flowing? Look at that. What's your level of influence, and kind of start there, and then follow that up with learning from others. I think this is a good example, Beyond 34. We'll get to hear pretty intimately, I think, what's happening in Philadelphia, the previous cities who have been involved in Beyond 34, and just that sharing, looking at strategies that have worked elsewhere and localizing it, but data.
That's great. Emily, over to you.
So Gina stole mine. Data is critical. You can't go anywhere without knowing what you're trying to fix, but be persistent. And find your champion, and don't be afraid to just constantly talk about it and sound like a broken record. But you just got to find the right door and move it through there. You're going to encounter a lot of people who don't understand the importance of this and the relevance of it, but somebody will, and that's who you want to connect with.
Those are great tips. I would just add, be pragmatic, use your sphere of influence. We're always trying to make it simple for our suppliers to get started. And I think the more you can do that, the better. I want to give a quick plug. So if you're one of those cities or regions thinking about how to get started, the Chamber Foundation will be picking 3 additional cities or regions next year. You can join the work. They're accepting applications through Q1 of 2022. And even if you're just wanting to learn a little bit more, to get involved, maybe not be all in, but learn a little bit, we'd encourage you to visit beyond34.org or get in touch with Peter, who is going to be putting his information in the chat for you right now. We really want everybody engaged and involved, and are so grateful. I just want to extend my thanks to the panelists for joining us today. I think each of you offered a good vision for communities to start thinking about and be inspired by. And John, I look forward to continuing to work together as we as retailers try to get this accomplished. So thank you all for today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Tracy Griffin, and I'm joined by my colleague, Mark Ryan. We are both part of Bayer's Pharma Division, working primarily on clinical studies in patients up to the point that the medicines are approved by the FDA. And our segment today is to share a little about Bayer's approach to sustainability and how we were able to put words into actions within our division. So I'll first give you a brief description of our path to ensuring sustainable behaviors as part of our normal culture here at Bayer. Then I'm going to hand it over to Mark to share a spotlight example of behaviors that had an impressive impact. So as with many businesses over the past years, at Bayer, we are formally putting sustainability at the core of our strategy and our values. Our leadership considers it a key enabler of our vision at Bayer, which is health for all, hunger for none. This is our vision across our divisions, which include crop science and consumer care in addition to pharma. Now, you're all aware of the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, and that provides a shared blueprint for people and the planet by 2030. So from these, Bayer identified 7 where we could have the most impact to combine the strengths across our businesses and with our partnerships and our external colleagues. It has also really provided us a focus and a framework that can engage all of our employees towards sustainable behavior. We've set some ambitious targets, and they really fall into 2 broad categories. One is decreasing our ecological footprint as a company, and we have many activities towards that. But we're here today to talk about the second category, which is to help more people thrive. We're taking a specific look at economically or medically underserved communities, and additionally at low and mid-income countries. We're identifying opportunities, and we're establishing measurable targets to make healthcare both available and affordable. So taking action as a business is, of course, a strong need, but the other result we have seen is with engaging all employees to think about the impact they can have at work and at home. It is an energized environment when employees can see their personal values align so nicely with the company culture. And it's really been as easy as having purposeful discussions on the broad sustainability topic. So as I mentioned in the beginning, Mark and I are both in the pharma division, and our intentions to have an impact existed before this formalization by the UN and within our company, specifically in our long-standing efforts to increase diversity in our clinical trials and to ready our organization to provide medicines to underserved communities upon approval. We work together with external physicians, with patient advocate groups, and now directly with patients to better understand the standard of care all over the globe and the needs of our patients. And we have pharma colleagues working together across companies to share insights and to brainstorm on how to increase access to treatment through clinical trials. We also work with tech companies to develop apps or wearables, and with service industries such as transportation services, all to decrease the burden on patients in our trials. But my favorite story of working beyond our key business of clinical trials and partnering with our partners and across businesses is Bayer's involvement in Kids for Life. So I'm going to hand it over to Mark Ryan to share some details about Kids for Life and the story of how this became a key initiative for us and an inspiration for us also at Bayer.
Thanks, Tracy. As she said, my name is Mark Ryan, and I'm the sponsor for Kids for Life at Bayer. I'll walk you through a high-level timeline of what Kids for Life is, how it got started, and where it is now, and what are some of our thoughts on the future. Kids for Life is a program that takes unused lab kits and clinical trial supplies and repurposes them for humanitarian aid. Before this program, these kits would basically just get thrown away. They would end up in landfills, harming the environment, and really not helping anybody. So Kids for Life at Bayer started back in October of 2019. This all came about by myself and some other Bayer colleagues. We're at an industry conference, the Society for Clinical Research Sites, otherwise known as SCRS. And at the conference, the Kids for Life idea had just won the Site Tank competition, which is basically their version of Shark Tank. It was right then at the conference that I felt that this was something that not only I wanted to get involved with, but that Bayer should be involved with. So let me fast forward all the way to August of 2020, months later, and after many internal meetings and presentations and some convincing, we were ready to start having our clinical trial sites stop throwing away these unused supplies and start donating them. So at Bayer, Kits for Life started as an idea or an initiative, as in many companies, that many of us wondered if people would support. We didn't know if we were going to get buy-in. We didn't know how it was going to all play out. But it was apparent from the very beginning, and the first time it was ever presented, that people were super excited about it and wanted to make sure it happened. We had more buy-in than we could ever imagine. The response from our clinical trial sites for the people that were actually donating the kits after our trials were over was also amazing. So at Bayer, Kits for Life is now embedded as a normal clinical trial process at all of our US clinical trial sites. And we're currently working on expanding this to our global trial sites in countries around the world. Another critical part of the Kits for Life success story is working across industries outside of pharma. We have been working with MedSurplus Alliance and the Task Force for Global Health, and this has been an incredible experience. Everyone is willing to have open conversations as to what will work, maybe we're going to find some challenges, but in the end, everybody sees this project and this topic one way, and it's just the right thing to do. And we always find a solution to any challenges that are facing us. Kits for Life is a great example of how a simple idea can turn into something truly amazing. I've been working in clinical trials for over 25 years, and to have an opportunity to be part of something beyond executing clinical trials has been absolutely remarkable. We often hear people say that we are living in a disposable society. For me, hearing this made me ask the question, can Kits for Life have an impact across the entire pharmaceutical industry beyond Bayer or other pharma companies? Right now, it's too early to really tell all of this because it's really just starting. But one thing I know for sure is that it will only happen if we continue to challenge the status quo and keep asking why it can't be more impactful. I would encourage people to check out Kits for Life online. You just have to Google Kits for Life and you're going to find more information and videos. But for me, this is just the beginning for Kits for Life and how we implement it throughout the industry. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Lawrence Bowdish, the Executive Director for Research and Issue Networks for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. I've been so excited to see such amazing work and what an impressive agenda we've had today. Congratulations again to Liberty Mutual Insurance, Biogen, General Motors on their well-deserved recognitions. We heard some of the amazing work on using purpose to drive corporate efforts, including from the Chamber Foundation's board chair, Tom Wilson. Companies are leveraging their purpose to drive initiatives ranging from sustainability to inclusive growth to COVID-19 response. We're excited to continue working with all of them moving forward. Tomorrow, we'll continue these conversations as we bring in the efforts of small and mid-sized businesses, the impact of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the importance of supporting public health initiatives and investments in local education. We'll also be honoring more Citizens Awards honorees, and I hope you will all come back to join us. Thanks, and have a great evening.